Bueno, voy a esperar un minutico más a Alex, si no empiezo yo, para no, para no atrasarme.
Entonces ayer salió todo bien.
¿Cómo?
Ayer salió todo muy bien.
Sí, todo bien. Nos
Qué
extendimos
bueno.
un poquito en una, pero al final como que lo logramos nivelar. Fue bastante chévere.
Sí, mi práctica va a ser un poco mi trabajo, pero quiero hablar sobre investigación, la importancia de la investigación en arquitectura. Es lo que creo que es el mensaje
Perfecto,
que quiero
perfecto.
mandar.
Me parece. Bueno, Alex no me contesta, lo quería esperar para que, bueno, el contacto fue a través de Alex, entonces me hubiese encantado que él te presentara. Pero bueno, simplemente vamos a continuar con lo que empezamos ayer. Nada, te queremos dar la bienvenida, no está Casey todavía, menos que es porque es súper temprano, de parte de la
Sí,
Universidad de los Andes, el Departamento de Arquitectura y Diseño y bueno, los profesores del curso de Pensamiento Computacional. Entonces, yo voy a empezar presentando a Gabriel. Gabriel Esquivel nació y se educó como arquitecto en la Ciudad de México con un título de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Recibió su maestría en arquitectura en Ohio State University. Anteriormente fue docente de arquitectura y diseño en Knowlton School of Architecture y el Departamento de Diseño de Ohio State University. Después de unirse a la Facultad de Arquitectura de Texas A&M University, en donde ha investigado los beneficios y los vehículos necesarios para un modelo heterogéneo que integra tecnología y dispositivos propios de la arquitectura. Gabriel comenzó a explorar diferentes posibilidades de investigación a través de la fabricación y asociación con el Departamento de Ingeniería Aeroespacial. Ha creado un nuevo laboratorio de fabricación de investigación avanzada que se ocupa del concepto de fabricación asistida por robótica, así como inteligencia artificial. Gabriel es el director del laboratorio T4T en la Universidad de Texas A&M desde el 2010, donde examina la integración de la tecnología digital para intercambiar información arquitectónica y su conexión con la teoría contemporánea. Fue el moderador de Interface en 2017, la discusión entre Patrick Schumacher y Mark Gage, así como curador y de la conferencia Deep Vista en 2018 y más recientemente en Digital Futures That World, moderó la charla sobre agencias, fronteras e inmigración. Entonces, bienvenido, Gabriel. Te voy a hacer
gracias.
por si quieres compartir tu pantalla.
Claro, gracias. Buenos días. Es en verdad un honor encontrarme en este foro latinoamericano en la Universidad de los Andes en Bogotá. Quisiera agradecer a Daniel Atencio y a Alejandro Alcalá por esta invitación. Soy Gabriel Esquivel y antes que nada quisiera presentarme a través de los proyectos de fabricación que he realizado en los últimos 12 años. Son una serie de proyectos donde se investigaron diferentes ideas de procedimientos, técnicas y materiales. Técnicas como CNC, termoformado, moldeo por inyección, corte láser, Arduino. Y hemos manejado materiales como espumas, plásticos, látex, fibra de vidrio, concreto con fibra de coco, fibra de carbono, plexiglas y traba roca. Hoy en día que nos enfrentamos a numerosos cambios importantes en la arquitectura, como el COVID-19, y en esta catástrofe del cambio climático, es de suma importancia la necesidad de mirar hacia el futuro. Al mismo tiempo, nos enfrentamos a retos tremendos y complicados en un contexto donde la tecnología ha superado nuestras expectativas. Pero el mayor problema para los arquitectos es la falta de agencia política, cultural, real y coherente. Quiero tomar esta oportunidad para plantear esa situación de una manera especulativa sobre estos problemas particulares, reconociendo el trabajo que todos ustedes han hecho y que siguen haciendo, pero ahora, ¿qué sigue? Me gustaría detenerme y tomar un tiempo para reflexionar una vez más sobre algo tan importante como la existencia humana, para pensar cómo hacer frente a esas tendencias totalitarias y fascistas que están afectando constantemente a nuestras ecologías. Eso se ha convertido en una tarea esencial. Para nuestro propósito, tenemos que entender por qué es importante considerar nuestra era como el Antropoceno, en la cual la actividad humana ha causado efectos irreparables sobre el medio ambiente. La humanidad ha impactado la Tierra de manera que los procesos naturales ya no pueden separarse de los efectos históricos, sociales, económicos y políticos. Se ha desafiado fuertemente la comprensión moderna y se ha abierto la brecha entre naturaleza y cultura. La naturaleza ya no puede entenderse que opera sobre leyes fijas o naturales, mientras que la política y la cultura no se pueden entender que opera en una esfera separada de autonomía y libertad. En mi preocupación como arquitecto en la búsqueda de agencia, estoy interesado en el problema de relación entre cultura y naturaleza, pero a la vez interesado en los aspectos de la tecnología digital, la cual nos brinda un sinnúmero de oportunidades dentro de este segundo periodo digital, de acuerdo a Mario Carpo. En relación a lo anterior y ante el problema de la realidad moderna, David Chandler propone 3 modos de gobernanza. Mapping, es decir, diseñar intervenciones indirectas basadas en el rastreo, mapeo de ensamblajes de emergencia interactiva. Prácticas en las que yo estoy interesado y forman parte de mi discurso, como la autocartografía, el kit bashing o ensambles arquitectónicos. Sensing se refiere a cómo el uso del Big Data o la Internet son capaces de proporcionar respuestas en tiempo real a problemas de prevenir o previos al evento. Y finalmente, hacking, lo cual es muy importante. Nuevas formas creativas de participación sobre la reutilización, recomposición y encontrar el juego en arreglos ya existentes y prácticas. Es decir, tenemos que reinventar fuera del modelo comercial el Internet y los softwares para crear nuevos workflows. Esto es sumamente importante. Todo a partir del conflicto de la realidad empírica del mundo tal como aparece en los supuestos progresos modernos como el conocimiento universal o la causalidad lineal. David Chandler afirma que la ontopolítica que informa estos modos es la afirmación de que el antropoceno, el mundo que es mucho menos direccionable por las supuestas construcciones de la modernidad, es más contingente, plural y complejo, pero menos amenazante para las aplicaciones del solucionismo tecnológico, lo cual nos favorece. En la mayor parte de la investigación realizada por mis colegas hay varias condiciones que impulsan un cambio, proponiendo nuevos tipos de intervenciones más allá de la agenda moderna. Ahora empezaré con los proyectos, primeramente los proyectos especulativos, que tienen básicamente investigaciones sobre el objeto, sobre lo que es el dibujo como medio y sobre la idea de representación. La casa 00. Después de la destrucción de la casa, los únicos registros disponibles son las múltiples imágenes de esta. Ahora la casa es un objeto imagen. La crítica, la arquitectura y la teoría nos evitarían las determinaciones artísticas originales. La casa O'Gorman ha sido considerada un cruce entre el arte y la arquitectura y criticada en términos estéticos, produciendo un conflicto entre el academicismo artístico y la crítica arquitectónica. Según Graham Harman, los criterios en que las obras de arte deben evaluarse incluyen un examen consciente de su entorno y la lectura de su condición como nuevo objeto el cual debe ser problematizado. La manera en que analizamos este proyecto fue utilizando la idea del objeto-imagen, es decir, la imagen manifiesta de la casa. Sin pretender reconstruirla, utilizando medios digitales, comenzamos esta implementación entendiendo que esta es su realidad, sin pretender una realidad física de la misma. La transformación de la imagen manifiesta es una especie de imagen anudada. Constituye una máquina que primero libera las figuras de las imágenes manifiestas en un momento que el aislamiento de esas imágenes se libran del sentido de afecto, actuando como vectores puros. Estas imágenes de baja fidelidad se proyectan, injertan y combinan de acuerdo con la superficie y el flujo específico que estos vectores dirigen sobre el objeto. Las imágenes se injertan en varios flujos y planos, produciendo una serie de nudos que organizan el objeto espacialmente. Esas operaciones continúan a diferentes flujos hasta que el objeto adquiere la masa deseada, con el potencial de volver a afectar y volver a territorializar el objeto con una nueva alta fidelidad. La imagen anudada no debe ser vista como un refinamiento de la imagen manifiesta de la casa, sino como la misma imagen original injertada y anudada a través de recuerdos reflexivos de realidades. Este conocimiento puede provenir de una variedad de fuentes, como la ciencia y la tecnología, y su afecto principal circunscribe las identidades que se aplican a la imagen original. Este nudo y negociación de la imagen manifiesta a través de la tecnología computacional ayuda a producir un objeto imagen científico. La tecnología de injerto utiliza las condiciones de la superficie 2D, mientras que la técnica de anudamiento introduce la imagen con un objeto 3D que es capaz de articulación espacial de la masa. La introducción de reglas de representación a través del injerto, la cartografía, proyección y en última instancia el anudamiento, que se pueden describir como la práctica de la ontocartografía, es simplemente el análisis o mapeo de caminos gravitacionales espaciotemporales producidos por diversas cosas, signos, en una situación o mundo dado. El mapeo de estas interacciones ayuda asegurar la correcta interpretación de los conceptos descritos por la imagen científica, es decir, un proceso de movimiento y devenir. En este sentido, es importante pasar por una investigación más profunda lo que es el dibujo técnico y todos los elementos que pueden ayudar a proporcionar un mayor rigor y precisión de los esquemas. Este método ontocartográfico nos permite crear una nueva ecología de las imágenes o situaciones en la que interactúa la casa 00. De hecho, es un nuevo objeto sin territorio, que conserva las ciertas cualidades del original, pero sin ninguna figura específica o imagen icónica. Se puede argumentar que la casa 00 es una casa real, dado que su producción se basa en la documentación de imagen que existe en la casa original. Este siguiente proyecto fue una entrega de un concurso llamado La vida secreta de los objetos, y en lugar de mandar el objeto, decidimos mandar el objeto desenrollado, unrolled. Este es otro estudio sobre dibujo, objetos y representación. Decidimos utilizar un detalle arquitectónico genérico sacado de un catálogo, ya que se convierte en un objeto no específico, por lo tanto su estado ontológico oscila entre un objeto tridimensional y el dibujo. Pero no es una forma de representación de un edificio arquitectónico o como algún tipo de protoarquitectura. Este objeto detalle utiliza un proceso de traducción tridimensional. Los dibujos objeto detalle se derivan de un medio tridimensional que en consecuencia fue desenrollado en Rhino, produciendo así el punto de partida oficial. Las operaciones digitales de la laminación y el desenrollamiento presenta una serie de subjetividad que tiene un grado de agencia sobre este objeto detalle en particular. Ese se convierte en el meollo del problema. Este objeto laminado es una aplicación atípica de un dibujo de sección detalle a manera de corte por fachada convencional. Esta sofisticación técnica se alinea como un reflejo de dos grandes desarrollos dentro de la arquitectura especulativa de esta última década. Una, la amplia difusión de la experiencia tecnológica y el cambio de la teoría crítica, entre la teoría crítica y la teoría proyectiva. Creo que este proyecto recupera una posición crítica diferente a ambas, pero se proyecta hacia nuevos entendimientos de la tecnología. Este objeto tiene la obligación de plegar horizontalmente tantas veces como sea necesario para los objetos del ejercicio del dibujo, sin otro propósito que articular una discusión a partir de una arquitectura específica o de un detalle específico. Técnicamente, en su posición no enrollada, interrumpe nuestra noción preconcebida de cualquier orientación arquitectónica. El dispositivo que hace posible que este argumento es el dibujo no laminado desenrollado. Este siguiente proyecto es también otro concurso. La idea de este proyecto era promover una intervención arquitectónica que tiene como objeto convertirse en un destino para aquellos que desean alejarse de su rutina diaria y vivir una experiencia arcaica, la casa mística. No será lugar de mera observación o alojamiento, será un lugar de espiritualidad y meditación. Las casas incorporan elementos que permiten observar las estrellas, rodeada de bosques y riscos. Roscascaleña, en Italia, es uno de los lugares en donde esta magia sigue ocurriendo y donde el cielo sigue contando su historia eterna y hermosa. Este proyecto, a primera vista, se encuentra en las ruinas en la cima de la colina y el cielo infinito, estrellas, astronomía y filosofía. Una especie de memoria sin conexión entre las ruinas tierra y el universo estrellas. Sin embargo, esta primera observación resultó bastante precaria. El proyecto necesita crear un tipo diferente, diferente a la condición del edificio existente. Desde el auge de su popularidad en el siglo XVII, las ruinas han recordado a los arquitectos que sus edificios podrían no soportar la prueba del tiempo. Al mismo tiempo han sido una fuente constante de creatividad. Las ruinas constituyen una posibilidad para que la arquitectura injerte nuevas visiones. ¿Es posible lograr que una futura resignación física, social y cultural de las ruinas? Las ruinas sustituyen una extraña forma de contar una historia a través de la memoria. Según Sylvia Levin, el pecado original de la arquitectura era que no podía contar historias a la manera de la poesía y la pintura, aunque ciertamente lo ha intentado, ofreciendo gestos de expiación como la arquitectura parlante y el posmodernismo. A través de sus argumentos teóricos podríamos pensar en cómo volver a contar la historia de la arquitectura dentro de la memoria y la historia después del posmodernismo. El proyecto se erige como un paradigma agotado entre la memoria y la historia contada en el tiempo narrativo, entre la tierra verdad y el cielo ficción. Nuestra intervención o máquina se encuentra encima de las ruinas existentes utilizando como territorio. Hablo como máquina a lo poética y no realmente como una máquina, incluso, pero esa es la idea de la ambigüedad. Sin embargo, decidimos utilizar un lenguaje arquitectónico que no intenta conectarse al lenguaje de la ruina, creando una discontinuidad en la memoria y poner a tierra un tipo diferente de máquina. En este punto de vista, estamos utilizando la arquitectura como medio para contar una nueva historia ecopolítica cultural. Siguiendo con las ideas de articulación dinámica exploradas en el terreno, vemos ahora nuestro edificio basado en objetos. Este edificio fue diseñado usando kit bashing, pero en una escala mucho mayor, convirtiéndose en una composición creada con un ensamblaje de partes, es decir, una especie de ready-made digital. Esto hace que no se lea como una articulación superficial, sino más bien como una combinación de elementos operativos discretos, es decir, una meriología, es decir, una combinación de varios objetos. Estos grandes elementos crean una forma general y masa del edificio, manteniéndose en la misma máquina y sensibilidad industrial de todo nuestro proyecto. Este edificio luego funciona como un desafío a la sensibilidad típica de reutilización adaptativa de la restauración, ya que los objetos de motor adquieren un nuevo propósito como habitaciones, comedores, etc., usando el propósito del kit de objetos de motor y máquina recolectados del Internet. Creamos grandes espacios de figuras, así como espacios ortogonales entre ellos. Máquinas postsingulares. Este proyecto es otro concurso en el cual ganamos una mención honorífica. Este concurso es desarrollado por Outer Space y en este caso fue acerca del Near Future. Nosotros proponíamos la vida o la exploración para la posibilidad de la vida en Marte. La postsingularidad tecnológica se define como un momento en la historia donde la inteligencia humana y la inteligencia artificial son una realidad incorporada que ha mejorado y transgredido para siempre en una forma de inteligencia que no es una consecuencia directa de los procesos evolutivos naturales, sino más bien como una manifestación de una nueva realidad post-antropocéntrica en una ecología posthumana. Este proyecto en particular se define como una forma prevista y diseñada de evolución humana, cognitiva y material, definida por nuestra propia falta de comprensión, capacidad para entender las herramientas que creamos para nuestra propia existencia debido a un progreso biológico estancado y lento. La generación de la máquina digital, estas máquinas son el producto del flujo de un trabajo algorítmico, produciendo complejidades topológicas que se pueden adquirir con conjuntos de herramientas tradicionales. Habrá una atención específica a los errores y fallos emergentes, glitches, no debido a las condiciones aleatorias, sino debido a las conversiones y manipulaciones erróneas de los vectores o voxeles. y pensar en ello como artefactos arquitectónicos digitales, traduciendo en una forma muy específica de lenguajes y estética. Estos algoritmos particulares y su implementación analítica en una era postsingular estarán abrazando lo inesperado. Programación, experimentación y modelado en el abismo, configurando atributos que solo sugieren estos procesos. La producción de estas máquinas se basa en el método algorítmico iterativo, utilizados para entender las relaciones espaciales y formales, con una preocupación por la manipulación, exploración y explotación de todos los medios. Traducciones iterativas entre digital y material y viceversa. Esas máquinas son sistemas que poseen características tanto naturales como artificiales. Finalmente, la idea es que estas máquinas llegan a Marte y empiezan a explorar a través de estas grandes agujas, tratar de investigar el suelo de Marte y ver si existen algún tipo de materiales, minerales, etcétera, que pueden promover o provocar o no la vida en Marte para el ser humano. Ahora quisiera hablar de investigación, el cual es muy importante para mí. Creo que es el meollo de esta plática. ¿Por qué la investigación es importante en arquitectura? En una conversación que sostuvo Sarah Whiting con Mohsen Mostafi en Harvard acerca de la investigación interdisciplinaria que la arquitectura requiere. Cuando la gente piensa en arquitectura y arquitectos, a menudo piensan en los arquitectos que construyen edificios, pero al mismo tiempo los arquitectos también estamos buscando cosas que podrían ser complementarias a la producción de estos. Así, por ejemplo, podría estar investigando cuestiones relacionadas con la historia de la arquitectura, con la tecnología de la arquitectónica, con el impacto de la arquitectura que podría ser económico, social y político. Sarah Whiting comenta, esa es la belleza de la arquitectura. La investigación tiende a entender en términos muy disciplinarios, por la que la investigación en ingeniería es una cosa, la investigación de las humanidades es otra cosa, la investigación en las ciencias sociales es otra cosa. Yo abogaría por una investigación de arquitectura como el pensamiento sintético en unión, esencialmente sintetizado en diferentes campos. Para mí esto es sumamente importante. La única manera de mover la arquitectura hacia el futuro es a base del sentido especulativo y de investigación. Para mí, la investigación en arquitectura implica el desarrollo de conocimientos especializados en un área en particular. La investigación no se trata simplemente de implementar nuevas tecnologías. La tecnología es importante, claro, y puede no ser muy eficaz ver la investigación en estos términos limitados. A veces la línea entre las actividades y una investigación estratégica se hace borrosa. Mi interés en la tecnología en esta combinación con otros aspectos de la disciplina es para mí, personalmente, la combinación de la teoría y la tecnología. Es por eso que hace 10 años desarrollé el T4T Lab. La investigación no se trata simplemente de investigar sobre nuevos materiales o el software más reciente para un proyecto específico y luego guardar la información en una carpeta electrónica para su referencia posterior. Simplemente se debe impulsar una línea de investigación conforme con sus estrategias propias con una intención de desarrollar nuevas áreas de especialización. Es importante incorporar profesionales en ejercicio al ecosistema de investigación académica. La investigación y el desarrollo son fundamentales para cualquier relación, compromiso o vínculo entre la academia, los profesionales y las empresas emergentes. Ahora me gustaría hablar de los ideales y cómo se formó el T4T Lab. El T4T Lab sigue los principios de Texas A&M de crear y fomentar oportunidades de participación que mejoran la compleja y eterna relación entre arquitectura y tecnología. Diseño e investigación como vehículos para el descubrimiento de nuevas formas de integrar la teoría y la tecnología y crear una conversación para el futuro de la arquitectura, la práctica y la disciplina. Este estudio llamado Vertical integra estudiantes de segundo y último año de la carrera, desafiando la tradicional organización del taller de diseño secuenciado al permitir que los estudiantes de diversos niveles de desarrollo y habilidades actúen y compitan entre sí. Sinceramente, creo que ese es un modelo pedagógico para el siglo XXI, crear una comunidad estudiantil en la que los participantes tienen varias responsabilidades, como la enseñanza de tutoriales o la administración del proyecto. Es un modelo de abajo hacia arriba, en reacción al enfoque del taller moderno tradicional, de arriba hacia abajo. Este tipo de taller vertical asegura que el cuerpo de conocimiento sobre diseño, tecnología y teoría se mantenga en la escuela y beneficia a muchos estudiantes. El propósito es invitar a los arquitectos jóvenes más destacados de la actualidad que se dedican a cuestiones de tecnología y a participar en la investigación y en la docencia. Tuvimos la oportunidad de contar con gentes muy importantes, afortunadamente, que nos han enseñado muchísimo, como Tom Wiscombe, Roland Snooks, Eric Goldenberg y Nicolo Casas, Bruno Juricic, Gilles Retzin, Adam Fury, Casey Rem, Nate Hume, Joris Butoniers y Gonzalo Bayo. Sin embargo, hay un problema en Latinoamérica. La educación arquitectónica en la mayoría de los países latinoamericanos se construye principalmente a partir del taller de diseño. Esta modalidad educativa donde el maestro guía el proceso de diseño. Sin embargo, rara vez vemos en este taller una propuesta metodológica innovadora o experimental, mucho menos especulativa. Hablo en general, o sea, esa es la idea, ¿no? Como señala Rodrigo Shore, director de la maestría de fabricación digital de la Universidad de Anáhuac en México, en su artículo para mi revista online Agencia, en el cual el estudio de arquitectura, el instructor mexicano se limita a trazar el proyecto y define el programa, dejando al estudiante la tarea de proponer el concepto, metodología o dirección de trabajo. En el proceso se refuerzan los conceptos y prejuicios que forman y determinan este ejercicio, dando mayor peso a aspectos prácticos y funcionales y rara vez potenciando los procesos especulativos o experimentales derivados en un posicionamiento teórico crítico frente a la práctica arquitectónica o los discursos contemporáneos. Shorda continúa. La arquitectura a nivel mundial ha mostrado notables avances en el campo tecnológico y la mayoría de los arquitectos latinoamericanos han adoptado estos cambios, casi en su totalidad. Hoy en día los proyectos ejecutivos se producen en tiempos récord, impensable hace mucho tiempo. Pero fuera de la obvia optimización en los tiempos de producción, tal vez podríamos decir que la tecnología digital en la arquitectura mexicana y en latinoamericana es una caja negra. Utilizamos la herramienta del siglo XXI para producir arquitectura del siglo XX. El discurso contemporáneo de la arquitectura debe evitar, el discurso contemporáneo en la arquitectura tiende a evitar teorizar sobre la tecnología. Normalmente se asocia a la tecnología, especialmente la tecnología digital y lo que se puede lograr con su uso correcto en el concepto de extranjerismo, en una arquitectura que no se aplica a nuestro país y que por lo tanto no debe estudiarse. Se deben comenzar a cambiar esos paradigmas y creo que este evento organizado por Daniel Atencio es un paso firme con este objetivo. La investigación, el Laboratorio de Investigación Digital Avanzada en Texas A&M. En el 2019 tuve la iniciativa junto con mi colega Mehdi Farad Bakash para crear un nuevo tipo de laboratorio basado en la colaboración docente e investigación como modelo para el siglo XXI. Es un modelo que puede ser aplicado en varios tipos de instituciones. Es un modelo colaborativo de abajo hacia arriba, el cual no requiere la inversión inmediata de un gran equipo como enormes brazos robóticos. El propósito de este tipo de laboratorio de investigación es centrarse en el potencial transformador de la fabricación asistida con robots, inteligencia artificial y la automatización de la arquitectura. La importancia de este laboratorio es abrir la discusión sobre diferentes tópicos, robots, la realidad aumentada, la realidad virtual y la inteligencia artificial. No solo como un conjunto de herramientas para optimizar elementos específicos de la arquitectura, sino más bien para enfatizar la capacidad de la arquitectura para servir como un marcador cultural, como una manera de entender la agencia de la arquitectura, desafiando la idea de metodologías computacionales como herramientas de conveniencia y eficacia, pero visto como medio, es decir, con lo que trabajamos los arquitectos. Y sobre todo, la importancia de la publicación de esta investigación. El primer proyecto fue Not Just Another Brick in the Wall, claro, la referencia a Pink Floyd, en el cual se proponía un sistema de celosía con piezas que doblaran la esquina. Empezamos a ver los métodos, digamos, tanto de investigación como pedagógicos, a manera de tutoriales, entrenar con robots fuera de línea, la exploración de materiales, en este caso utilizamos barro, y aprender todo el sentido del horneado. Another Brick on the Wall es la idea de hacer un muro a base de paneles generados a partir de procesos robóticos de impresión, en este caso, el uso del barro. Es muy importante también mantener una producción muy clara y muy limpia, sobre todo para para agilizar todo ese tipo de cosas, y muchas veces también la manera de producción se interrumpe por no tener digamos, una línea de asamblaje que es bien importante. Este proyecto de Percepción 2, ese proyecto originalmente fue diseñado para el pabellón italiano en la Bienal de Venecia, pero debido al COVID-19 tuvimos que cambiar el rumbo del proyecto y la investigación. Este proyecto es el resultado de la experimentación en la hipersección realizada en un laboratorio de investigación durante la primavera del 2020. Su objetivo es proponer la hipersección que incorpora una lógica de construcción y montaje derivada y consistente como alternativa a las metodologías discretas actuales y como un medio de fabricación de realidad aumentada y robótica. El sistema de diseño de hipersección es el estudio sobre teselación y de patrones y estructuras tridimensionales resultantes. Un sistema de diseño de hipersección permite la creación de una estructura tridimensional a partir de dos objetos bidimensionales a través de su interacción no mediada, una intersección booleana entre sus proyecciones ortogonales. El sistema general permite que las lógicas de estructura y fabricación se integren de forma coherente dentro del proceso de diseño. La investigación de hipersecciones, una vez que se configura un sistema de diseño de hipersección, varias proyecciones pueden funcionar al mismo tiempo como generadores o como receptores. El diseñador puede operar tanto en la estructura tridimensional como en sus proyecciones. Dicha metodología consiste en parametrizar la lógica de la estructura dentro del diseño. Es decir, que desde un principio se va diseñando no solamente es el diseño, sino también es cómo se van a agregar las piezas y cómo van a funcionar estructuralmente, todo desde un principio, para no tener que retroceder y hacer un tipo de ingeniería reversiva, ¿no? La teselación es el punto de partida de todo esto, es decir, desde un punto 2D se va a desarrollar a través de diferentes métodos de extrusión, etcétera, y después interseccionar estos dos conceptos. Una cosa muy importante también es cómo se va a cómo se van a unir estas piezas, y fue uno de los tópicos más importantes de esta investigación. La hipersección surge de objetos bidimensionales que directamente a través de sus proyecciones se cruzan produciendo un nuevo objeto tridimensional. La continuidad bidimensional emana de discreción tridimensional, con complejidad volumétrica reducida a información plana. Este sistema sigue la forma discreta de fabricación donde las piezas se ensamblan de una forma de agregación que permite múltiples arreglos del diseño. Con la premisa de la fabricación, el montaje se convierten en elementos cruciales para la construcción inteligente. Los procedimientos numéricos otorgan consistencia digital a través de las etapas de diseño, fabricación y el montaje del procedimiento de hipersección que ofrece condiciones previas óptimas para una fabricación automatizada, robótica y el montaje a través de realidad aumentada. Una parte sumamente importante fue la integración de un sistema de juntas flexibles debido al sistema que se proponía para impresión digital. Teníamos que manejar una serie de juntas que a la vez, cuando se iban ensamblando las diferentes partes, no tuviéramos un número enorme de juntas. Se tenía que parametrizar eso y tratar de estandarizar las juntas de una manera de tener más de 2 o 3 para que el ensamblaje fuera mucho más fácil. Esos son algunos de los sentidos de investigación, de una manera muy, muy sencilla, tratar de hacerlo, ¿no? Finalmente, el robot iba a ejecutar esta acción de doblamiento. Específicamente la posibilidad de reducir la estructura tridimensional a base de piezas discretas resultantes de teselación bidimensional ofrece la condición previa para resolver componentes tridimensionales mediante plegado de unidades bidimensionales. Básicamente se está imprimiendo un modelo plano para ser montado plegado en su volumen completo. Esto reduce el tiempo, reduce el costo y el tiempo que son esenciales en el proceso de construcción. Eventualmente la impresión 3D y la fabricación continua se pueden realinear con lógica discreta. Más allá del proceso de fabricación es el montaje que se vuelve verdaderamente relevante, permitiendo una gran diferenciación de piezas dentro del sistema discreto. Una vez que el conjunto se ha montado en el espacio digital, la realidad aumentada ayuda a crear un paisaje instructivo, indicando la ubicación física de cada pieza. Este proceso elimina la necesidad de interpretar y traducir las intenciones del diseñador a un instalador o instaladores. La realidad aumentada puede agilizar el proceso de ensamblaje de objetos, superponiendo información para otros entornos visuales y reales. La idea era tener un sistema de comunicación que iba directamente del modelo de ensamblaje en la realidad aumentada, conectada directamente con el brazo robótico y que no existiera realmente un intermediario, es decir, un factor humano de mediación. Esa es una de las maneras en que empezamos a ver cómo se iba a generar este doblado de estas piezas. Las piezas son impresas en un plástico especial que al final, cuando se va juntando, tiene propiedades estructurales, pero también tiene flexibilidad. Entonces el robot iba a lograr todas las piezas y después, a manera de la comunicación de la realidad aumentada, iba a ir ensamblando, haciendo el ensamblaje de las piezas. Mediante un empleo de técnicas de termoplegado, los componentes impresos en 2D se pueden doblar para adquirir una estructura tridimensional. Este procedimiento ofrece una solución alternativa y discreta al problema de la estabilidad de la fabricación aditiva. Utilizamos AR en el montaje de las piezas discretas, formando un todo complejo. La complejidad existe en la superposición de una pieza a base simple, escalada, en momentos únicos para crear varias lecturas. El uso de la plataforma de la realidad aumentada permite ajustar la escala de estas piezas en un tiempo real, negando la necesidad de prototipos costosos, una combinación de impresiones 3D y visualización en modelos generados en realidad aumentada. Permite la reconfiguración de nuestro todo agregado. Una vez que el conjunto se ha montado en el espacio digital, el AR ayuda a un paisaje instructivo para terminar este proceso. Aquí vemos todas las juntas de preparación listas, lo que ya teníamos todo preparado, todo analizado y desgraciadamente, como decía al principio, llega el momento del confinamiento y todo se tiene que cambiar, todo se tiene que parar y decidimos, no, obviamente ya no se hizo la instalación, se canceló también la Bienal y tuvimos nada más que enfocarnos a seguir con la investigación en diferentes áreas, la comunicación más que nada la comunicación entre el robot y la realidad aumentada y dedicarnos a producir trabajos de investigación para su publicación. Una de las partes importantes, obviamente, de esta investigación es la investigación sobre la inteligencia artificial. Y dentro de los objetivos de estas, teníamos que tener muy claro qué teníamos que hacer antes de empezar a hacerlo. Lo que decimos era, tenemos que trabajar en varias escalas, empezando de una escala, digamos, de superficie, una escala a nivel ornamento, la otra escala a nivel edificio, la escala de un edificio, y la otra a nivel urbano. El objetivo principal tenía que ser la transformación de 2D a 3D y buscar cualquier tipo de metodología o investigar diferentes metodologías para poder lograrlo. Era importante observar que se está haciendo en el exterior y proponer alternativas diferentes. Y, sobre todo, basar la investigación en la problemática de la disciplina de la teoría de la arquitectura y no con un aspecto puramente técnico. Eso para mí es sumamente importante. El hecho de tener un gran entendimiento de la tecnología para mí es bueno, pero si no tiene un contacto directo con lo que es la arquitectura y proponer una manera de de brindarle agencia. Para mí realmente no tiene no está proporcionando lo que realmente se necesita. Pero también es importante no convertirnos en un workshop de style guns y de ser hacer ejemplos de este tipo nada más y hablar sobre inteligencia artificial, ¿no? Entender que la inteligencia artificial es una extensión de la inteligencia existente del taller de diseño, tanto analógica como digital, y no viene a sustituirla, sino a aumentarla. La inteligencia artificial como una forma de aumentar la agencia del diseñador. Es uno de los primeros proyectos. Este es un proyecto en escala, digamos, de menor escala, en el sentido escalar, no en importancia de investigación. Esta meteorología y dimensión estética emana de nociones del barroco y de la ontología orientada al objeto. El punto es que nos enfrentamos a una serie de condiciones meteorológicas del barroco y también las implicaciones estéticas que resultan. Hay un aspecto crítico de la arquitectura que se convierte en un conjunto de piezas, una posición meteorológica, agregación, una reacción crítica del barroco. No solo como ornamento y filigrana, sino la suma de las partes es mayor que la totalidad, o sea, podríamos decir mejor. La navegación de esta exploración comienza y depende de la curación. El medio de encontrar y suspender la realidad del barroco es muy sensible a los objetos imagen, ornamento y filigrana que fueron seleccionados. Además, el flujo de trabajo workflow se inicia entrenando una red regenerativa antagónica GAN en un conjunto curado de tal manera que contiene imágenes de objetos barrocos para generar nuevas expresiones y articulaciones del barroco. Las imágenes generadas o figuras se relacionan momentos de interés en función de las estructuras dentro de la imagen. Esta elección es el resultado de un interés por las partes más que por el todo y el deseo de extraer momentos y cualidades del barroco en lugar de reproducir su totalidad. Esa selección se traduce en 3D utilizando los valores del vértice de color RGB de la imagen style gun, usando Houdini como el medio para lograrlo. Los objetos resultantes a veces son desordenados con problemas de resolución, por lo que antes de proceder, la integridad de la malla se debe reparar y subdividir. Después de eso, la articulación pesada se aplica a través de un procedimiento de transferencia de estilo, Style Transfer, 2D a 3D, que se basa en la misma imagen generada por el Style Gun. Los objetos figuras 3D activan las nociones de escala a través de sus líneas. La línea se basa en un valor de curvatura del umbral de la superficie que da como resultado tanto una polisuperficie alta como una polisuperficie baja. Los momentos de alta articulación en la malla limpia se relacionan directamente con momentos de baja resolución anteriormente del workflow. La investigación que se está desarrollando se basa en la imagen del barroco más que en la realidad histórica. Esto nos permite centrarnos en actitudes específicas del movimiento en lugar de tratar de reproducirlo con workflows contemporáneos. Una noción de la ontología orientada al objeto que tomará parte en el proceso de anotación que no solo activa la transparencia, sino la democratización del workflow, alterando así la realidad que percibimos del barroco en un giro para el objeto hiperarticulado. El urbanismo en la inteligencia artificial. En la actualidad, en muchas partes del mundo se encuentran entrenando imágenes, especialmente en el campo de la imagen urbana. Nosotros observamos, entendemos y analizamos otras propuestas para establecer nuestra propia línea de investigación. Este proyecto usa los mapas NOLI para explorar la figura a fondo, cómo estas relaciones afectan la forma que abordamos el diseño urbano. Los mapas de NOLI aplanan la jerarquía del terreno de la ciudad y reducen la imagen de la ciudad por sus elementos más básicos, sólido y vacío. Este mapa bidimensional es un espacio urbano que muestra la relación entre los valores sólidos y vacíos y establece contexto para cómo leemos el entorno construido y no construido de manera formal, canónica, basada en los argumentos de Colin Rowe de la ciudad collage. A medida que seguimos experimentando, decidimos empezar a dividir el conjunto de datos en categorías con el fin de obtener resultados más refinados que dependen únicamente de la escala y el contexto que aspiramos, ya sean escalas de vecindad o planos de la ciudad. Nuestra versión de IA, de la reinterpretación de la planificación urbana y la parametrización de estos resultados, permite una interpretación imparcial de las imágenes de la figura fondo, que a diferentes escalas, al tridimensionarlas, estas líneas 2D, las líneas 2D en las ciudades. El primer paso de nuestro proceso fue reunir varios mapas NOLI, como otras condiciones de figura fondo, y reducirlos a blanco y negro. Al reducir varios mapas NOLI a versiones puras en blanco y negro, somos capaces de generar nuevas versiones imparciales de un plano de la ciudad. Con este conjunto de datos, diferentes escalas y densidades de ciudades, obtenemos una variación de mapas NOLI que comienzan a darnos una versión diversa del general de la ciudad y cómo la organización se puede desarrollar. Alimentamos las imágenes en un software de style transfer como Runway y entrenamos estas imágenes de paisajes extrayendo las relaciones figura-fondo recién generadas. Con este Runway podemos crear nuevas versiones de IA, de mapas de NOLI y interpretaciones de lo que podría ser un plan de la ciudad, esencialmente dándonos una nueva imagen de la ciudad. Esto nos permite producir varios cientos de resultados diferentes de una manera eficiente. Esta rápida producción y generación de nuevas imágenes es lo que hace que el flujo de trabajo sea tan importante, o el workflow. La velocidad generativa permite crear y juzgar varias salidas o outputs de una manera más rápida, así como proporcionar una variedad de resultados. Los outputs creados a partir del Runway tienen un rastro de las imágenes originales, pero se han difumado y se han convertido en un mapa NOLI completamente nuevo. Estos resultados son completamente imparciales y no se limitan al enfoque modernista común de arriba hacia abajo para la planificación urbana utópica. Poder tener más de 500 imágenes recién generadas permite una variedad de lo que normalmente no serían vistas por el ser humano. Es verdaderamente, esto es muy importante porque le da una agencia al arquitecto al curar estos conjuntos de datos, el cual alimenta a este programa generativo. Y a consecuencia tiene un determinado proceso de entrenamiento, el cual somos capaces de controlar la escala de resultados hasta cierto punto, permitiendo que el IA piense en un contexto determinado que se reduce a sólido y vacío. Con nuestras nuevas imágenes generadas, comenzamos a tridimensionalizarlas con el uso de Grasshopper. Podemos utilizar el script que vectoriza los mapas NOLI entrenados y produce curvas cerradas que luego podemos extruir. Nosotros mismos nos dimos cuenta que tenía un problema, digamos, de consistencia, y tenemos que buscar una mejor manera de hacer esta tridimensionalización. Es decir, la corrección del problema de generar la tercera dimensión con el no desplazamiento orientado a 3D a través de la vectorización, sino poniendo la huella fuera de la extrusión. A base de esto, creemos que la proyección del espacio latente debe de relacionarse en el input para poder tener la mayor cantidad de agencia y obtener los resultados deseados. Es decir, toda la curación de todo el entrenamiento que existe y pensar directamente en lo que es el input es lo que realmente para nosotros nos ha dado los mejores resultados, digamos, y mayor consistencia. El último paso en nuestro proceso es la representación de los objetos producidos. Después de varios intentos, decidimos, con el fin de hacer un método más intencional de representación, entrenaríamos las imágenes del mapa NOLI generadas que se utilizaban para hacer la topografía del suelo con imágenes satelitales. Esto produjo resultados más legibles y añadió una capa de profundidad al producto final. Los resultados de nuestro flujo de trabajo se juzgaron entonces en función de la legibilidad y resolución de una condición de figura fondo. Las alineaciones de los espacios sólidos y vacíos deben estar presentes tanto en la topografía urbana como con la imagen satelital entrenada para proporcionar una mayor comprensión de nuestras nuevas condiciones urbanas. Todos estos proyectos son proyectos en proceso. No están terminados, entonces básicamente les quería mostrar cómo va esta investigación. Estamos investigando, son 5 proyectos, de los cuales seleccioné 2 para enseñárselos, si no, la plática sería sumamente larga. Finalmente, aprovechando este espacio y perdonando, perdonen mi atrevimiento, me gustaría invitarlos a que chequen y me sigan en mi revista en línea que se llama Agencia, en la cual, como dije anteriormente, tratamos de ver cuáles son los problemas de agencia en la arquitectura en México, que creo que tiene mucha aplicación en la arquitectura latinoamericana, y hablar sobre teoría, hablar sobre educación, hablar sobre investigación y sobre tecnología. Con esto les doy las gracias y si existen algunas preguntas, estoy a sus órdenes.
Muchísimas gracias, Gabriel. Increíble el lecture, todo súper interesante. Y bueno, es un poco a lo que vamos con la nueva reforma del programa, este curso, robótica, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, súper inspirador todo el trabajo. Bueno, los estudiantes, por favor, preguntas las pueden escribir o pueden pasar sin problema. ¿Quién rompe el hielo?
No, y quería decir que yo pienso que, a diferencia de lo que la gente cree, digamos, nosotros no empezamos esos laboratorios con una cantidad de dinero enorme, ¿no? Sino al contrario, con una cantidad de dinero muy, 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 muy reducida. Y paulatinamente a través de grants, hemos logrado comprar todo ese tipo de equipo, ¿no? Pero entonces lo que yo quería comunicar es que realmente si tienes ganas, si tienes sobre todo el factor humano, puedes hacer grandes cosas, ¿no? Y finalmente, digamos, el equipo se puede ir comprando y puedes ir adaptando tu producción y tu investigación de acuerdo a eso. Entonces, yo pienso que es una ironía, digamos, una ironía neoliberal el decir que la única manera de poder hacer investigaciones a base de tener un gran equipo y un super laboratorio y todo. Yo creo que es algo muy, muy diferente actualmente, y todos esos procesos de abajo hacia arriba, que es lo que yo siempre he manejado, es sumamente importante, ¿no?
Sí, 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 completamente cierto. A ver, vamos los estudiantes. Aprovechemos que es en español. Me imagino que ayer había un poco de... Estaban un poco tímidos. O los profesores también, si quieren.
Claro.
Yo tengo una pregunta, Gabriel.
Ok.
Y quiero como poner en relación dos partes del trabajo que presentaste. La primera era más de representación, que eran dibujos,
sí,
¿cierto? Una segunda parte había ya, digamos, un desempeño tridimensional, físico, con estos modelos que después, en donde entraban los robots y la realidad aumentada. Y quería poner eso en relación un poco en términos de lo que tú mencionabas de investigación y tecnología, y traer, digamos, una cita de Peter Cook cuando él habla en uno de sus libros del dibujo, y dice que por ejemplo, los espacios de Vladimir Tatlin o lo de Da Vinci interrogaban, ¿sí?, una realidad, interrogaban una arquitectura, y lo hacían desde lo improbable, ¿sí? Lo hacían desde lo improbable y lo impulsaban más la arquitectura que lo predecible. Digamos que su interés era que realmente no se podían realizar, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, me interesaría entender ese paso que tú haces de la representación allá lo físico, digamos, ese paso, digamos, de lo dibujado allá lo, digamos, construido a través de lo que sea, ¿cierto? De los robots o las manos o
sí,
de
sí, claro.
¿Cómo entiendes ese paso tú en términos de tu investigación? En términos de cómo llevar esa arquitectura más allá de lo predecible.
Bueno, lo que quiero aclarar es que, digamos, yo lo presenté de esta manera, pero los procesos iban siendo paralelos, ¿no? Es decir, cuando yo estaba haciendo estas investigaciones sobre la representación y el dibujo, que para mí es muy importante, también estaba haciendo los proyectos que presenté al principio, que son proyectos de fabricación que tienen digamos, una producción física, ¿no? Pero para mí, sobre todo, lo más importante es precisamente eso, ¿no? Es decir, yo creo Creo firmemente en la idea de que los procesos canónicos, de entender cuáles son los medios de los arquitectos, es decir, empezando desde el dibujo y elementos teóricos y teorizando esas ideas, es como se va creando, digamos, para mí, el cuerpo de trabajo con el que después empezamos a abrir esa nueva investigación. Es decir, teniendo esas bases canónicas y fijas y ya una línea de investigación teórico-tecnológica, fue cuando empezamos a plantear este problema de investigación. Es decir, lo que sería el know-how de cómo hacerlo, digamos, físicamente, en cuestión de materiales y todo eso, ya lo teníamos. O sea, esa era una experiencia que ya teníamos. Lo que no teníamos era esa combinación de nuevas tecnologías en problematizarlas de acuerdo a cuestiones, digamos, de representación o cuestiones teóricas. Y eso fue un paso, digamos, que nos llevó algún tiempo para entender esa combinación y poder generar este laboratorio. No sé si eso responde a tu pregunta, ¿no?
Sí, creo que...
Sino que no puede haber para mí un laboratorio de investigación arquitectónica si no hay una base arquitectónica firme en cuanto a un aspecto esencial de medios, herramientas y cánones. O sea, a lo mejor son un poco muy clásico, ¿no? Pero pues es lo que realmente creo, firmemente.
Pues creo que yo no diría clásico, sino que un poco se deslinda de la manera habitual de acceder a lo computacional, que es trayendo, ¿no?, referencias de otras disciplinas. A mí lo que me pareció, digamos, tal vez una de las cosas que más me pareció más interesante de tu presentación es que surge de la arquitectura y está haciendo arquitectura y está pues llevando esa arquitectura más allá, ¿no es cierto? O sea, surge perfectamente de lo que uno maneja como herramientas arquitectónicas, ¿no? Entonces,
claro, esa era la idea.
Pues uno de los valores enormes de eso es, de la investigación es ese, ¿no es cierto?
Absolutamente. Yo pienso que yo digo, en el sistema, digamos, de académico en Estados Unidos es muy importante, digamos, la evaluación, ¿no? O sea, ser tenure track tienes que ser evaluado por diferentes gentes que entienden la investigación de una manera muy, muy diferente. Entonces, no se entiende o no se ha desarrollado el entendimiento de lo que es la investigación en la arquitectura a partir de la arquitectura para problemas arquitectónicos. Y entonces, es un campo que en realidad no se ha desarrollado muchísimo y hay mucho que hacer, sobre todo para transmitir a otros sectores la importancia de lo que tiene, y que no es un aspecto solamente tecnológico, no es solamente de humanidades, no es un aspecto de investigación social, etcétera, sino arquitectura es una combinación de diferentes cosas. Pero para mí el problematizar, digamos, problematizar el barroco o la ciudad etcétera, para mí eso es muy importante, ¿no? A lo mejor esa es la diferencia con otras investigaciones, pero es siempre volver a ese aspecto de la arquitectura, es muy importante.
Perfecto. Gracias.
Buenísimo. No sé, yo creo que tenemos ya. Maybe we should change to English. Casey Ramitz. And maybe just one last question to continue.
Hi, Casey.
With Casey's lecture.
Morning, Gabe.
Hey, how are you?
Ideally from a student. If not, then we can continue with the lecture.
Well, thank you so much. I think it was great. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and and congratulations. That's really it's a wonderful thing for you guys to organize, and we should have a lot more of these. So.
Yes.
So keep on doing it. That's great.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. And please feel free to stay if you want. I know.
Yes,
you
of course. I want to listen to Casey. Of course.
Okay, perfect. So we continue with Casey Ram. Casey was Alejandro and Carlos and my professor at SCI-Arc, from who we learned a lot. So it's a great honor for us to have you here with our students too. Casey Ram is a designer and algorithmic consultant based in Los Angeles. He received his master in design and advanced architecture from Columbia University in 2009 and his BArch from Carnegie Mellon University in 2005. He has over 10 years of architectural experience working for firms in New York, Los Angeles, Berlin, and London. Both his architectural and interactive media work has been exhibited domestically and internationally. In addition to his professional experience, Rem has been a full-time faculty member of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, assisted studios at Columbia University, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Pratt Institute, and taught workshops at the University of Kentucky. Currently, he teaches graduate design studios and seminars in programming and robotics in design at Sire, and it's a new coordinator of the Architectural Technologies postgrad program at Sire. So welcome, Casey. I'm gonna make you a co-host so you can share your screen.
Great, thank you, Daniela. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's at 6 a.m., which is, as maybe my former students will tell you, I'm not a super morning person, so I'll do my best here. But I apologize if this is not quite as sharp as usual. But I'm very excited to be here. I think what you guys are doing with your program is really excellent, and hopefully we can continue a conversation between our institutions moving forward. Okay, let me try to share my screen here. So I wanted to kind of lead off with this video. It's a little bit crude. You know, it's kind of just a time lapse of a project I did a few years ago. But this project, in a lot of ways, encapsulates the way that I work and the way that I think about design. In that I am both kind of working through designing software and software platforms in order to produce the architecture. There's an obsession with automation and an underlying obsession with producing design through designing intelligences. So the work that I do is often kind of focused on writing or coding different forms of artificial intelligence, both with kind of the machine learning and neural networks, but also with older like semantic or explicit like artificial intelligence. And the idea of being able to embed design decision making into some kind of automated platform. So like in this case, this is a piece of software I wrote for controlling the robot, which autonomously 3D prints designs. It's linking together a 3D scanner, which is mounted on top of this. You can kind of see the leg of a metal gantry and a web camera. The robot continuously 3D prints, records what's been printed previously, and adapts and adjusts and develops new tool paths autonomously to create the form. And this kind of loop between bringing information from outside of the computer and then designing the way a machine or a piece of software generates value or information or utility from that, and how that process itself becomes a design space, and is really what kind of is underlying the work that I do. And this takes a lot of forms. So for example, last fall, I produced an exhibition for the FRAC Biennale that was curated by Hernan Diaz Alonso, who's the director at SCI-Arc, and Luca Garofalo. And the exhibition was kind of tasked with creating this artificial intelligence, which would continuously generate like architectural images and content over the course of the 3-month exhibition. So this exhibition, called The Architectural Beast, was a kind of stack of many different layers of intelligence, including ones which were learning how to generate images, ones which were learning how to like read and classify those images, ones which would then generate architectural critique or theoretical text from those images and try to describe them, and one which was trained to migrate the internet every night and search for what the collective kind of valuation that you get from social media decided what the most interesting architectural works were. Over the course of the show, the Beast had its own Instagram page, and kind of would post 3 to 4 images every day with accompanying text. I'll show some examples. But a lot of the ideas I was thinking about at the time comes from some of the work that Lev Manovich had done. He's done a series of analytical projects of trends and phenomena that occur on social media platforms. And so for me, the architectural beast was like one tool to begin to understand or explore that complex space of this like kind of new territory in which discourse and image production is created. And one of the trends that Manovich discusses in this particular essay was he begins to classify images into kind of categories. And one of those categories are images produced by people with a design background or a design education, so either a kind of fine arts degree, architecture degree, or industrial design degree, somewhere where a person's been educated on like kind of particularly like in the Western schools, kind of canonical compositions and ideas of aesthetics, like with the kind of rule sets and governing concepts. And then in addition to that, he identified this other types of image compositions that were beginning to emerge on Instagram, which sit outside of those kind of guides of compositional and graphic practices that those of us in the academy or who are educated in architecture school might follow. And instead, we're sitting outside of those kinds of dogmas, but we're very high performing in terms of their scores. And he called this the kind of designed image, and it's a way that kind of collectively, as people are posting to Instagram, and begin to kind of co-evolve as an ecosystem towards more high performing scoring systems based on the way Instagram values likes and views and so forth, and putting things higher up on the chart, created these like kind of alternative aesthetics. So what I wanted to do with this exhibition is over the course of the show, this is an example of just a kind of walk through its brain. You guys have probably seen a ton of these sort of GAN walks. It's like the required thing if you're doing neural network. One thing too is you've probably seen better ones than this, at least in terms of graphic quality. Because the thing that was interesting to me about this piece was I don't often have the ability to camp out on a server for 3 months and run something this intensive, like, except in this kind of exhibition space. So on the one hand, there was actually a physical installation in the gallery, looked like that, that was being controlled by a computer at the museum. And at the same time, that computer was continuously evolving over the course of the show in the way that I often don't have that kind of time span to work with. And the way that the exhibition worked is at the outset of the show, the machine was trained on the curated set of artists that were selected for the exhibition and architects, many of them from SCI-Arc and SCI-Arc adjacent friends. And so the kinds of compositions it produced, let's say, are the ones that were kind of valued by Hernan Diaz-Alonso and Luca Garofalo in terms of how they curated the show. And they kind of pretty closely align with the types of compositions and images that are produced by the faculty at SCI-Arc, for example, or artists like Fabio Marcaccio was one of the artists that participated. And what the machine would do is every night at 9 p.m., during the day, it would make these kinds of images that I was just showing, these kind of walks, and maintain its social media presence with quirky posts, like with really bizarre text. But at 9 p.m., the machine would turn off its exhibition display, which kind of coincided with the museum closing, and go out and search the internet on social media platforms like Flickr to find out like what that day's top-rated architectural images were. And there's a more kind of convoluted search process for that than just searching for architecture, but that also how it searched kind of evolved over the show as well. And it would download those images and retrain itself every night. It would add them to the existing data set and kind of rework its mind. So over the course of the 3 months, you start to see a transition where the kind of grid on the left is from the first week of the machine, and the grid on the right is from after about 2.5 months or 3 months. And what we started to see was kind of emerging preference on social media for what like is valued of architecture tends to include a lot of like medieval European city squares and villas on the countryside. So we started to get these kind of more pastoral landscapes. One of the things, we're going to be rebuilding this exhibition probably this spring at SCIARC. And I have some kind of more sophisticated tools or like models that I can begin to work with for that. But the machine kind of never got, the types of image generating algorithms that we were using actually can produce photoreal images. However, like, I purposely manipulated the code so it would never actually get there. Because one of the things that we discovered was if I allowed it to kind of overtrain itself, it couldn't keep evolving, it would collapse. So we had to kind of purposefully step on it. So they always were in this kind of ambiguous, like muddy territory. This is an example of some of the text that it produced. This is actually the text from the upper left-hand image on this right square here. These are the types of things that it would write to social media. It's okay. I teach some seminars at SCIARC, which, yeah, it's not too far off from the types of things that I would maybe get in some papers there. So it's not going to kind of win any awards for its discourse here, but at a certain level, it was fairly compelling. And this text was kind of trained on my writing and the writing of some of the other people on the show, like Damian Jovanovic and Liam Young, Liam Young, a couple others. So this is the kind of physical installation. Hernan conceptualized the project as a kind of update on Duchamp's double glass piece. And so each of the kind of original artists would have a still printed, including myself and Hernan. And then, so each of these is like a paired screen with a kind of still print of some of their original works from samples from the original data set that the machine learned from. And then each of the screens below is actually a further kind of evolved version of the machine to more specifically address each one of the artists' styles. And then it's kind of hard to see from this photo. I didn't take particularly good ones, but there's a central machine, which is the actual continuously evolving machine that kind of governs the rest of them, which has a kind of composited image on top of it. So this idea of kind of building like stacks of intelligence or assembling things is the underlying idea of this work. In terms of like when I'm thinking about producing a piece of intelligence, it's like looking at an architectural problem. It's often about many forms of intelligence being linked together to produce a kind of contingent relationship that begins to develop some kind of significance. So like in the case of some of the architectural projects, this might be looking at kind of a drone survey of a landscape in the desert, architectural precedents in terms of planning, maybe structural performance. And when I'm working this way, like the kind of one of the underlying ideas that comes from this idea of building these contingent structures of value on top of the information is that the information itself is in some ways mutable in terms of its significance. So this is actually just the point information of this like desert here in the lower left. And in terms of what the machine sees, it is a series of kind of hexadecimal integers arrayed in a grid, which is completely meaningless to me as a designer. And so as I'm designing the software, it's kind of my responsibility and my territory of agency to then find ways and structures of information management to begin to turn something like this into something that has significance for myself or other architects, or the same kind of information, the same exact information represented in terms of how I would feed it to a neural network, for example, that's normalized kind of 3-channel information. This was like another installation I did. This was a piece that was featured in an exhibition at the Pompidou this past February. That's actually at this point a 5-year-old project now that I keep having to kind of dust off and figure out what to do with next. But it was just a kind of very clear in a linear way, unlike a lot of the other work, I could clearly delineate like kind of the stacks of information that I was trying to produce to generate the piece. So the idea was to looking at how to generate kind of speculative urban landscapes in terraform or sites that are being impacted by climate change. So in this case, it was simulating from the upper left images of actual satellite image of Greenland, and then the one below it is a kind of simulated projection from the artificial intelligence of what it would look like without, as the ice shelf is receding, which it actually is in that spot. And then a designed city plan from there, and then a kind of extrapolated a kind of medieval oblique elevational map of that, which became then the basis of generating a kind of master plan, Noli map floor plan, actually more in line with the Campo Marzio project drawings by Piranesi. And from there, I extrapolated a kind of endlessly animated vertical volume of gray boxes procedurally from that. And those again were transformed into different facades that I had kind of collected from my travels. In this case, it's as a kind of endless facade that's been trained to turn kind of abstract volumes into facades from Ginza and Tokyo. Simultaneously, like the plans were used to generate a series of 3D buildings and landscapes for, at the same time I was exhibiting and the video in Pompidou, I also had to do an installation at the University of Texas where we made a little city of these out of 3D prints from this, using some more 3D networks. Yeah, and so that stack continues. We correlated facades to floor plans, or the machine trying to predict the floor plans of an apartment when sampling a specific area, trying to predict the interior perspective of that apartment. We scraped massively from Zillow and Compass's websites, and this is all for Manhattan, so it's a very expensive apartment. But we created a kind of artificial, let's say, economy for this city, or real estate for the city, where it predicts the value for that, and then writes actually at this point we're starting to get better with our tech stuff. It's a fairly convincing real estate blurb for like one of those sites. So the idea was to try to begin to layer these different contingent pieces of information and intelligence until it begins to add up to this kind of speculated world. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it goes for a long time, but it's a loop through. This is actually taking the desert, turning it into city, and then turning that into facades, the kind of oblique. Yeah, so this is actually buildings trained on downtown Los Angeles, and then pops up. Here's like an example. Actually, it's the one I showed. Yeah, so this thing kind of runs on a loop for a while. Each one of these images down here that's continuously alternating, that's constantly updating the prediction of the interior based on the elevation that's going through it at that moment. And then we pulled some out and enlarged them to do the kind of real estate thing. Some of none of these plans are ready for this particular machine's plan generation. We do a lot with plan development in the office. This machine clearly is like not ready for the building department. It's struggling, but it's working from a really kind of bad data set for what we're asking it to do. Some models, projections. So as we're beginning to like build these networks and these types of intelligence, there's this other kind of underlying problem that we're always kind of pushing against, which is something called that Patricia Reed, who's an artist and philosopher in Berlin, calls inductive stagnation. And this is the tendency to assume that the givens are the truth, or that the things that have come before are the kind of sum total of possible things that could be. And when we're looking at a neural network or feed-forward intelligences in particular of the different types that we work with, there's this kind of underlying issue with them that they're very kind of energy and labor intensive in terms of both their computation, but also you have to train them on kind of large data sets of pre-existing information. So they have an inherent tendency to simply like repeat the types of images and the types of solutions to a problem, because we're not just using them for image production that have already kind of pre-existed. So they're very good at automating solutions that already exist. They're not there's some question as to how you begin to leverage them to find not just quantitatively novel results, but actually qualitatively novel ones. Like, you know, if you guys have all probably seen all of the deepfake faces, and yeah, each face is a new face that doesn't exist, but it doesn't exactly look like a face we've never seen before. So it's quantitatively, technically it's a new face, but it just looks like a face. So one of our strategies is to begin to kind of lean into the biases of how the machine operates differently than we do. And particularly for us, we have this kind of obsession in our studio with, I have an office with my partner Yasushi Yoshida. We have this obsession with kind of threshold in architecture, and particularly like assembling these moments of interface in architecture to define it rather than, let's say, like totalistic compositional ideas or parties or diagrams that are like kind of totalizing the organization of the space, but rather that we are leaning into the biases of these machines, which are accumulating features to develop the kind of outputs or the organizations or the solutions, to purposefully kind of rescale the way that we are thinking about how to define a piece of architecture. So rather than maybe like, you know, I put the Noli's map and the Piranesi's Campo Marzio side to side, and you can read the Campo Marzio in particular like a whole bunch of different ways. Peter Trummer just released a whole book where everyone took their own take on it. A lot of them positioning it in triple O, but we take a kind of decidedly Prometheanist nihilist look at it. Again, about kind of assembling or extrapolating features from Piranesi, taking them from Roman ruins to try to begin to speculate on what a whole city would be from that incomplete knowledge. And that's the kind of strategy that we work with in the studio. So we're purposefully like working more and more with networks which aren't generative but are classifying, and basically looking at how that machine understands architectural precedent differently than we would. Understands spatial organization differently than we would. It doesn't care about kind of classical floor plan strategies or diagrams. It only cares about the proportional relationships between the material and the void and the threshold and the space. To create a series of projects which are, we're progressively moving them towards something that we're going to be trying to build by the end of August next year. And of these buildings which have these organizational strategies in particular, which are impossible to analyze through kind of architectural tradition, but are still performative in relationship of defining spaces and how you occupy them. This was a kind of early attempt at a kind of tower strategy using this, like accumulating a mix of three-dimensional neural nets and also non-learning agents to begin to organize both kind of plan and structure. And this is using a very early structural model, which definitely doesn't work, but it makes cool shapes. So we made some renderings of it. And that same strategy was used to kind of automate the design of this installation. And really, we use this installation to kind of push how far we could automate things, down to the fact that we were 2 weeks into building this. And one of the students that was helping me build it asked what we were building, and I had no idea. So we had to make some renderings. Basically, the machine had generated a series of drawings and uploaded them to Google Drive, and then we were downloading these basically shop drawings from it, or panel schedules and constructing them. I knew what sorts of things it was making. I just didn't know specifically what it was making. Like it was just giving us kind of the instructions to make it. That's not normal. It was just a kind of exercise that I was curious about to really kind of push the extents of that. But definitely, it kind of reinforced to me that I should definitely look at the stuff that the machines I'm designing are making before I start building it, because I think it could have been a lot better. But it was a useful exercise for us, because one of the things that it showed us is that even within a kind of really simple like installation like this, where you're not having to deal with the complexities of an actual building, like things like waterproofing and mechanical systems and all of that, much of this project was done through explicitly coded intelligence, where you as the designer have to put in every rule about how it addresses each condition that you're trying to address with it. So, each kind of connection, each kind of detail. This one actually has a functioning structural algorithm as part of it, because even though it's not very tall, like it's purposefully, like there's a lot of weight up the top, and this is a very bad way of generating a wall that's kind of has shear. So I had to kind of accumulate clusters in a way to create enough friction to keep this thing from like twisting itself apart. It also is like this is like one of our only times where we've combined some of the real-time machine vision and like media-based work that we do with our physical production, as we wanted to speculate a bit on what a domestic space would be like if it was essentially like decorated or ornamented with the with kind of reconstituted images of the occupants. So like all of these mirrors are these real-time machine vision based kind of glitch pieces. They're back projected mirrors. So you're getting like, they don't photograph very well, because you get, there's a glitch pattern etched into the back of the mirrors. So you get the real mirror, and then you get a projection, and all that adds up to create a bunch of refraction, which doesn't show up in cameras. But each one of these things is actually, like when you're in the space, you can very clearly see yourself and your face being kind of remanipulated and extrapolated. Like, so I had like facial recognition things that would track as you move through space. The back wall was actually like let's see, let's skip ahead. But the back wall was, we took these kind of horizontal pans with a drone of downtown LA. And so basically what we did was we synced the position of the drone and that sweep to like your position in the gallery. So up to 6 users could have their own kind of personal perspectives or windows that were digitally created on the city. It was really a project about kind of narcissism and voyeurism, those combinations within a kind of domesticated space, at the same time as kind of pushing the types of machines that we're using to make the 2D information are almost identical to the ones that we used to make the 3D. There's just a z-axis grid and some slightly different intelligences. So as we continue to develop these strategies, this was a house from, I think, 2.5 years ago now, that has a lot of versions of it, but this is the one I like the best. And it was, again, working with kind of external information from drone images, but also learning in terms of like plan organization from modernist pieces, or modernist projects primarily. So obviously like Mies van der Rohe. And what we wanted to do was kind of resample Mies's spatial organization strategies from these kind of compositions, which he liberally extrapolated from Kandinsky's paintings, proportionally in terms of some of these implied infinite arcs and the way the kind of grids and lines separate from each other. And particularly like the brick house, a lot of it is about the kind of infinite wall and defining infinity through this like literal vector, which kind of extends past the edge of the drawing on an unlimited site. We wanted to make a kind of introverted version of that, where resample and reconstitute it so that the legibility of the relationships between the parts, particularly in plan, was impossible. This is about it's about a 3,000 square foot house. This is not the final plan, but this is the one I like. But certainly it has a lot of, and the reason I like it is because I think probably because it is so impenetrable. And at a certain level, the way that the material assembles itself and plan, it doesn't make a lot of sense until you begin to operate perspectively, and then the types of volumes and spaces become more clearly defined by the way the kind of wall elements begin to stack up in space. We began to kind of begin some early studies in manipulating the panels of the walls and the roof for structural performance, doing kind of studies with generating robot toolpaths first based on loading conditions, and then kind of rough stick models that we continue to develop for a proposal for a pavilion for the Tallinn Biennale 2 years ago, last year. That actually, my colleague Sumin Ham at SIRC, her team won with a really impressive pavilion with of steam bent timbers, which were bent under using augmented reality to build the form. So workers had augmented reality helmets on. It's a great project. If you guys haven't seen it, you should check it out. I think it's called Steampunk. But we were bummed out that we didn't get to build that house. So we wanted to use the exhibition or the installation pavilion as a way to continue to develop some of the strategies and some of the assembly logic a bit further. It's obviously much smaller, but we had the opportunity to begin to address some sectional things, at least within the kind of spatial organization that didn't exist in the house, because the house was on like a huge flat site out in an area called 29 Palms in California, which is kind of east of LA in the Mojave Desert. But this we had a little bit more compressed site, and we're interested in also how the kind of interior section of the project could work with these kind of, we kind of stupidly are calling them wallums in the office, wall column things that get assembled to produce this. And spending a lot more time doing a series of like really detailed study models looking at essentially like a kind of flat packed construction system where we had a kind of foundation strategy with like an angle bracket on piers that you kind of tilt these things up and they snap into place like Legos. Yasushi developed a lot of like self-centering detail connections that we're hoping to kind of use moving forward. But the project really was just a way for us to kind of dig in a way that to some of the, like take some of the ideas we had about the space and the general material into the kind of tectonics that we didn't have the opportunity to with the Desert House. Here's some study models. We took the photos at 3 a.m. when we finished the model and shipped it to Estonia, and we have no idea what happened to it. So unfortunately, these are the only photos I have. So you know, with that SIRC, we're kind of I bring a lot of this research into the school. This is from a seminar that I've been teaching where we bring in like different parts. So in this case, it's like the robot platform and the panel scheduling, like AI, and also like we're working with like a 3D neural network. So the house and the Tallinn Pavilion are actually, they're not, it's not just trained on the plans, but it's actually a 3D neural network that then is resampled through the kind of procedural paneling scripts. So our students kind of work with scaled down versions of this, and we're using the seminar to kind of improve the software for the robot control for that. There's a lot of issues with like tolerances, but what we're working towards is we have a new robot coming in the spring. It's actually here. We're just waiting for a house for it. That's going to allow us to do architectural scale production, and we're going to be basically extending the system up to the scale of about a 700 square foot ADU is our first test. Not these patterns. These are the intro patterns I teach my students. These are very poor performing structural patterns, but the types of patterns that we saw in the Tallinn Pavilion are actually responding to stresses and loads. But here's some examples of the little kind of prototypes that they develop in that seminar. But yeah, so we have received research funding and grants and support from some construction material groups. You know, each one kind of interested in a different portion of the project to scale some of the things we were testing in the Talent Pavilion, hopefully improve them significantly. I think I watched a lecture this past summer that Marika Trotter, who's the history and theory coordinator at SCI-Arc, was lecturing about AI and architecture, and she was showing some examples of my work. And I think she described the Talon Pavilion as deeply ugly, 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 ugly. I don't know why Casey made this. He used to make nice things. So anyway, we're trying to improve the kind of the resolution, the design strategies. Like we're very happy with the plans of those projects, but elevationally and sectionally, like they're not quite where we want them. So we're going to be using this kind of smaller housing prototype to both like really push the structural performance of those kind of panel systems, the robot assembly software, and also then the architectural kind of proposition of like what a house could be. Because this idea of the, this idea of the interface is not just this idea about kind of interfacing software, but how humans like interface their spaces. And what we're really interested in is kind of redefining like how we organize architecture, less on ideas about kind of maybe program, or previously like maybe like in Shumi's attempts to do that with the event, but is in our case we really are interested in this idea of interface. So basically giving up any kind of need for like a totalistic clarity or a kind of figural clarity in exchange for maybe unknowable holes, but with these like moments of legibility or clarity that govern how we engage with these spaces or these things. Because we think that then in a lot of ways it's like a kind of continuing back to the way that we operate now as humans, with comfortably inhabiting these like unknowable vast spaces of things like the internet, the near ubiquitous surveillance state that we live in, you know, our cities and things. But we have these kind of tools and UIs, for lack of a better word, that allow us to kind of navigate them, and we're kind of giving more and more away a need to have a totalistic understanding or a constructed belief system about how something is, to just being completely happy with like moments of legibility and utility within those systems. So that's what we're working on right now over the next couple months, and yeah, we have to build a house by next August. And then I'm just going to wrap up. So I've got maybe 10 more minutes or 5 more minutes based on what you asked for. Is that right? Yeah. So also over the last kind of year and a half, I started doing collaborative projects with another faculty member here named Damian Jovanovic, whose interest is in essentially like video games and video game theory, and how the representational strategies of the video games are allowing for new ways of understanding designs. In particular, he argues that the way that video games kind of collapse these different forms of representation and interface together. So you might have like a plan and a perspective all kind of continuously updating in real time with simulated effects in real time, and you know, simulated realities. Is a kind of first opportunity to extract ourselves from the Cartesian paradigm that we've been living in since the Renaissance, and the kind of advent of perspective and the kind of perspectival grid. He's got some lectures that you can dig in on that if you're interested. But our projects have really been about beginning in many ways, kind of more like really frivolous ways, beginning to test out different forms of understanding or describing architecture and simulating it, or simulating form production in this environment together, between like the kind of artificial intelligence and the more user-friendly, like interactive side of the types of game engine-based platforms that he develops. Like a lot of the work outside of the stuff I do with Damian, there's very little effort given to a user's interface with the software. I'm more interested in the user's interface with the result. So, I mean, actually, it's probably my 3 former students can tell you, like a lot of my scripts and programs are kind of impenetrable, obtuse, and opaque. So Damian is much more interested in kind of legibility about these operations. So this was a project we did for Glassbead, or it's a extrapolation from a project we did for Glassbead, which is a journal, and I think it's based in London, maybe Paris, where they asked us to translate text into form, and particularly like thought exercises, and it was like a thing that we couldn't actually do. So what we did was we scraped a bunch of tweets based on emotional state. So I got like 34,000 happy tweets, for example. And we trained a neural network to basically you enter in text or type out your thought exercises, and it evaluates based on probabilities, like your sentiments from that. And we also had this young designer named Ji Hao in the office who curated a vast 1,000 asset library based on his personal emotional response to them, which may honestly be the kind of that was definitely the shortcoming. Like the Ji Hao method for correlating emotion to object type is not really it wasn't a super rigorous study. So, but then you can like type in text into this machine, the neural net analyzes it, and it generates either like these kind of world components or these objects, which then are attempting to kind of learn how to navigate around these clusters, and they have kind of ill-formed bodies, kind of aggregated parts based on the sentiment of your production. But what we liked about this was beginning to find other ways of kind of coding information about architecture than just the kind of image or the voxel, which most of my work is based in kind of voxel space, and looking at how we can use text as maybe in some ways like a more efficient or like alternative again strategy to kind of describe architectural content. And we kind of continued that project and refined the text response and the kind of understanding of relationship between architectural form and text to this like application, this app that we developed and streamed online during last spring's SciArc spring show exhibition. It's called Twitch Plays Architecture. It's like a riff off of was it Twitch Plays Pokemon, I think. But so basically, over the course of the show, you could type in comments on Twitch, and then based on Twitch, based on those texts, it would do a similar thing to the previous one, but it was much better. Like it began to understand when you were describing something that was dealing with the exterior versus the interior, like round versus soft forms, and then you had this kind of continuously evolving structures based on whatever people were typing during the show. This is actually from one of our tests, so there's not that much stuff getting propagated here. It looks like it's just 3 of us testing the app. But during the actual exhibition, there was about 300 people on here at a time, and so it was creating these like really massive piles of parts. And like while you're typing and adding parts in, all of the parts have their own intelligence about trying to fix their connections, which they're in a constant struggle to do. So it's a kind of continuous feedback loop between users on the social media platform kind of collectively trying to design something, and then the inbuilt intelligences of how all these parts are trying to reconnect to each other. Each one of these parts is actually sampled from student projects that were in the SciArc spring show. So there's another way also for people like outside of the school to begin to explore or play with the kind of content being produced by SciArc. And then finally this summer, we did another kind of piece, which was exhibited in the last Ars Electronica show, where we wanted to begin to, you can probably see we have like a obsession with the Campo Marzio drawings, but we wanted to begin to use the game to explore like evolving kind of endlessly AI generated, let's say the proto architecture or threshold conditions with users. So we trained up a network and a set of procedural algorithms to in the final game, it produces a new one of these cities every like 5 minutes. This is like a zoomed in portion of it, showing a little bit more detail, like the kind of plan and the 3D geometry that's generated from the plan. And this thing is it's kind of like a terrarium, maybe. It's like or an aquarium, I guess a terrarium, of this thing that lived online for a month during the exhibition, where these users that Damian and his wife Lydia had designed are continuously trying to find their way through a really like a kind of constantly changing, autonomously developed, let's say, like city that the neural networks that I designed were producing. So we had a lot of ambitions for this project at the outset, you know, like about kind of co-evolving the space with the user, and like trying to develop new ideas about kind of threshold for that. But we only got it to the point where these kind of Chrome organisms kind of frustratingly tried to get through this system and like go to different kind of goal spaces within the terrarium over time, and kind of score their efficacy in getting to there, and kind of also the kind of resistance of the platform to that. So yeah, I think that's it. Is that good? Yeah. So I always end with like kind of absurdist stuff. Like in this case, it's a bunch of three-legged Chrome things trying to walk through a point cloud. That's all I have, Daniela.
Okay, thank you so much, Casey. I don't think it's ugly. I think it's really beautiful, everything that we saw. And I don't know if maybe some of the students and maybe the professors have some questions before we start with Nicolas.
Hi, Casey. It was great seeing your work firsthand. Again, really interesting. I liked how you navigate us through, your studies from stacks of intelligence, and getting these outcomes of predicting a floor plan or an actual value of a real estate object. I found very interesting the exercise about maybe the latter ones in which these stacks of intelligence start to organize different parts and aggregate objects. I found those a little more appealing than the exercises about reaching those moments of legibility in the plans and elevations. And as you said, you found more successful results in the spatial organization of plans. So what do you see as your future work going into? Is it more about reaching this kind of better resolution and fidelity and moments of legibility, or just a more free explorations of those stacks of intelligence, like what you get from sources like Twitch and those installations that you made?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be kind of pursuing both. For me, like right now, my primary interest is on the kind of housing project, and particularly because I think I have these ideas that I have about the kind of nihilist, at least towards an architectural discourse, like concept of what the architecture should be, or like what a house should be, or like a typology or a diagram for a house should be. I think requires executing it to the kind of full resolution of the project to really kind of understand its ramifications. Like every time we open up a new detail on a project, I mean, you guys all know, well, yeah, everyone here probably knows, like when you're working on a project, right? It's like as you hit each kind of level of resolution of the project, a new set of constraints or issues arise that you have to address, right? And they help you kind of reshape the conceptualization of the project. So at least in terms of that, like there are things that I can pursue, I think, to, and we are like, we're doing some competitions right now, and that sort of thing, which is at the kind of conceptual design, and schematic design level. There's things that we can continue to refine in the projects in that sense, but to me, like unless we kind of bring these things into the material and resolve these tectonic issues too, like it's a kind of empty project, right? Like I don't want it to be a paper project. I want it to be a kind of new form of housing here in LA. Well, first here in LA and then the world. But yeah, so I think for me, like that's maybe my my kind of obsession right now. But I also at the same time, you know, the things that make the office money are not those like it's
Right. Yeah.
the exhibition pieces and the media pieces, and then, you know, software development stuff is actually what keeps the office open. And I do like doing that work, and there's always new opportunities within that work to kind of push some new conceptual territory that then influences the other work. But I think maybe, you know, I worked professionally for 8 years before I even started teaching. And I'm a little bit like, yeah, there's a part of, it might be I don't know, an intellectual shortcoming, but there's a part of me that's just, I really want to build this thing now. Like I've made a lot of like real crazy exploded voxel stuff, you know, over the last couple of years. And I'm now trying to like kind of figure that problem out of how to bring this agenda into the materials. My kind of personal preoccupation right now. But yeah, we have both things going at the same time.
Awesome.
Perfect. I don't know if there's any other question from the professors or Gabriel or Nicolas that just arrived or the students. Okay. So I think
Okay.
that's, thank you so much, Casey. It was incredible to see all your work and what you guys are doing at CYREC as well. So thank you so much. We'll continue with the tutorial from Nicolas Turkey. Please feel free to stay if you want. Nicolas is another talented friend that will share one of his techniques with the students, and I would like Professor Carlos Navarro to introduce him, please.
Sure. Thank you, Daniela. Okay. Yes, I'm very excited to introduce to you Nicolas. He's a friend and a computational designer with an impressive background that I am pleased to share with you right now. Nicolas Turkey is a designer at Zaha Hadid Architects, an adjunct professor in computational and parametric design at the University of Bologna and the Polytechnic of Milan. Nicolas holds a Master in Architecture 2 from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a Bachelor of Architecture and Master of Architecture 1 from the University of Bologna, where he received the Best Thesis Prize. Before joining Zaha Hadid Architects, he worked in several international firms, including Peter Eisenman Architects, Sefirot Arc, Mario Cucinella Architects, and 5+1 AA. Nicolas is particularly interested in emerging technologies and how they affect the theoretical aspect of the discipline. Nicolas has also been studying the relationship between architecture and philosophy and graduated with a thesis on time and space in architecture, influenced by the thoughts of Henri Bergson and Edmund Husserl. His work has been widely published on some of the most prominent digital platforms and magazines, including Arc Daily, Next Top Architects, The Archaeologist, GSD platforms, etc. Nicolas is constantly pairing the work in the practice with the more theoretical research and academic collaborations, participating in competitions, jury, academic panels, lectures, and teaching courses in various institutions, including the Harvard Graduate School of Design, the University of Bologna, the A&M Texas University, the New York Institute of Technology, and Design Morphine. So with that, I leave you all to enjoy Nicolas's workshop.
Thank you very much. It's great to see you, all of you here, dear friends and amazing designers. I was following along with the precedent lectures, and it was really great. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna try. Can you all hear me?
Perfect.
Yes, great. Okay, yeah, great. Perfect. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Well, hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Thank you once again. I want to thank the Universidad de los Andes for sure, and Daniela, Carlos, and all the other professors. Thank you for the invitation. It is great to be here. And well, I'm really glad also that the time change is not so drastic. So since I'm in London, it's afternoon, which is perfect. I'm not a morning person either, like Izzy. And I would say it's really great to see also dear friends here sharing this amazing work. I'm the last presenter, but I hope you're still fresh. As Carlos mentioned before, we are going to see some tutorials, some quick demonstration today. So right after this very short, I will try to keep it short presentation, I will move on this hands-on exercise. And I would say it's a quite simple exercise. It's more of a demonstration instead, where pretty much everyone who has a basic to medium knowledge of the software Autodesk Maya can follow along. So the title of this quick presentation is Entropic Traces. So we will soon discover why I named it so. But before, yeah, I think I already got a pretty good introduction from Carlos, so there is not much to say. As I said, I started I first approached architecture in Italy, as I'm from there, at the University of Bologna, where I got my bachelor and then my master. And then I decided to further my studies and go study in the US, where I got a master in architecture at Harvard GSD, and worked in several firms before landing at Zaha Hadid Architects in London, where I'm based right now. At the same time, I'm an educator, so I'm teaching as an adjunct professor at the University of Bologna and Polytechnic of Milan, and also an associate at Design Morphine. I saw you had Michael yesterday, so we are both together into this experimental design, and now became also a design-oriented platform, but mainly an educational platform, doing webinars and workshops worldwide. And I would say my main research has always focused on user-oriented architecture, prevalently, with a strong emphasis on the experience, thus embracing architecture as a cultural phenomenon and drawing connection with multiple disciplines. For those of you who have been following my work, you might know that I largely researched on the relationship between architecture, philosophy, and physics, particularly by injecting the fourth dimension in my design agenda. So I recently started to talk about space-time architecture or time-based design. Embracing multidisciplinarity is a key aspect of my research. So I believe that we can enrich the discipline through hybridization and cross-contamination with other fields. Another important aspect that drives many of my projects is accepting complexity and layering of information. So a multiplicity of readings and interpretation are welcome, and also subtle references I consider them as an enriching moment when experiencing a building. Indeed, I believe a good building raises up questions rather than proposing, pre-made or ready-made formulas and answers. So what you're looking at the screen is just a few examples of my personal work I want to share with you, but it will be super brief. And in this case, this is a skyscraper with this translucent skin that decomposes the facade and then slowly reveals the complexity and intricacy of the body, of the inner body that is fragmented towards its extremities. So, but by doing so, the structure sort of enhances the user experiencing, establishing new relationships with the surroundings depending on the level, blending with the sea, the cliffs, and also the sky. Another project, I drove inspiration by celebrating the blending of program and context that apparently wouldn't go along, apparently would clash. It could only, say, become one single thing, one harmonic thing, thanks to an architectural intervention, which is the case of one of my projects called Water Music. And of course, drawing connections with other disciplines, as I mentioned before, like in the case of the Museum of Mobility and Transportation in Bologna, where the entire experience and the design process itself was highly informed by the thoughts of Harry Ingersoll. Or like in the case of Frozen Memories, where literally Nolan's Memento attempts to dialogue with Husserl phenomenology. So to me, each project is an existential experience itself. Basically, it grows and changes as we do. And as I guess, particularly you students know better than me, it also consumes us, right? But at the same time, it brings new perspectives. It's refreshing and refreshes the way we render reality every day. So I know this is going to be a tutorial-based session, so I'm going to wrap up this that I would just call more like a sort of a quick slideshow. And I'm going to move on and further present you with the exercise of today that, believe it or not, is going to be oriented towards Boolean, which is nothing new. But you know, like with some facets, some interesting aspect that will shake a bit the meaning of it. So you know, everyone knows that Booleans get their name from their inventor George Boole, and essentially Boolean constitutes of a algebraic notation used to represent the logical prepositions by means of binary digits of like 0, 1, which also corresponds to false and true. But at the same time, Boolean operations on polygons are a set of Boolean operations which include and or not, XOR, and they represent symbolically these relationships between sets, classes, and other entities. So I find it really fascinating, the correlationship, the relationship and the correlation between such a strong grammar statement, but also I would say a polygon statement, of course, as we're talking about inclusion, separations, and so on. And its possible use within the architectural realm. But even more interesting is what if these meanings begins to shake? So what if this Boolean starts to be animated and those statements begin to compromise, say, between each other, generating a series of hybrid conditions, I would call them. In my opinion, the digital realm seems to be a great platform to initiate this conversation that can be brought forward. So this will really be just a quick demonstration using very simple primitives that can be further considered as proxies and then substitutes replaced by your own geometry in case. We will use basic animations techniques in Maya to animate the passing through of an object, let's call it an object B, into an object A, and we will study the trajectory. All by trying to keep the process as procedural and reversible as possible. So making use of some ghosted information in Atlas Maya. We'll then be fragmenting and controlling time using some of Maya cinematic and operations, and we'll try to repeat the Boolean operations given this new framework. So this will result in a series of configurations that are subject to the manipulation of a specialized synthesis of the fourth dimension. Indeed, we can further control the properties of object B in time rather than in space, affecting object A in real time. This can be just, let's say, the beginning of a workflow that also enables us to grab the output, trying to manipulate it further, even better if it's not a final output, but it's a sort of like a partial result. And then we will twist it back into an input for further manipulation, sort of dismembering the idea, the Newtonian linearity of time through its specialized representation in this case. So thinking about time, I believe we will exhaust our locating time soon and also won't be able to develop the workflow further, but this can definitely be deployed in so many applications in design. And of course, it can be subject of further animation techniques. I've been working myself within this workflow and paired with other strategies as well. So depending on the subject of the research, the brief, etc. Of course, now we are working, this is a tutorial demonstration, so we're working in sort of like empty space. But things become definitely more interesting once we start to compromise with brief context and of course other entities. And I would say traces can kind of emerge in pretty much in everywhere, bringing us that sort of like proofs moment. I can also imagine from the point of view of the user. And even when they are or they've been subject of to multiple layering, therefore compromise their identity, almost becoming unreadable. I like the fact that the early version of Grasshopper was called explicit history. So Maya, despite the way designers and architects are used to work with, and I can say that coming from an office who mainly works with Maya in that way, so like mainly polygon modeling, pushing and pulling vertices, components, and so on. I would say that the most interesting part of Maya is actually hidden in the procedural core. So the sort of like node-based interface, which can still be accessible by the user-friendly attribute editor that you find in the software. Of course, there are more procedural way of working with Maya, but I think that for less than 1 hour exercise, this will be enough. And even if it appears as a relatively simple workflow, do not underestimate the design potential of it. So just to give you an example, this was a starting point of a very important project of mine called Competing Chronologies that I developed back in 2018. It was a mixed-use development in Bishopgate Courtyards here in the heart of London, including a physics department and a research center and an overground metro station altogether. So I think I talked enough, and we can move on and open the software for all of you who wants to stay in touch or want to have more insights on the workflow and have questions for afterwards. You can reach out to me. I would say I'm mostly active on Instagram among all the social medias, so that would probably be the best and fastest way to reach out to me. Thank you very much. I think we can start with the tutorial. Okay. Sorry if that was too long. Gonna try and find a way to switch my screen. Okay. So you should all be able to see my other screen open with Maya on at the moment. This is a very empty interface at the moment. You pretty much see all that I see. So I want to make sure we are all on the same page. Might ask if I can get a reminder if I'm getting close to the end of the time as while I'm designing and drawing stuff, sketching stuff on Maya. I very often lose the sense of time, ironically. So yeah, this is the basic interface of Maya. Today is going to be an introduction to a workflow, so I won't really go through and explaining you the basic interface. Kind of trying and taking for granted that you more or less knows how to navigate the software itself. But we are starting from this empty scene. We have this full splitted central window viewport. And I want to locate to the perspective now. So what I will do, I will try to maximize the perspective camera by hovering on it and pressing spacebar. You can repeat the same command and with spacebar going back to this full split view setup and hover on, say, the top view and do exactly the same. So this is a very quick way to navigate between different views in Maya that I found very, very handy. And at the same time, you see that when I press the space bar, although I'm releasing the button immediately, if I keep it pressed, there is this sort of like, it's a very important instrument you have in Maya. Basically, it's a hotbox menu where you can access pretty much all the menus in Maya. You will see that today we will switch between menus in Maya, which is quite common, at least in my research, as I'm trying to, expand the research towards different departments in Maya. And the way you navigate between different departments in Maya is mainly happening by switching from this top left menu, where at the moment we're set to be on modeling, but this can be easily switched to, say, animation, and we will do that as we're going to play with animation a bit. And this means that you are going to access, you see the some menus here in the top bar are changing, so you're going to access other menus depending on the department you're working. As many of you might know, Maya is a software that was firstly developed it wasn't meant to be for architects or designers specifically, but more and in the in the sort of like movie industry. That's why we have animation. That's why we have certain departments called effects, rendering, and rigging. And of course now it's used worldwide as the basic platform to for character animations, for instance, along with many other disciplines. So it's that's probably one of the reasons why Maya drew my attention to the software in a way, really because of this idea of bringing interdisciplinarity inside a software. And I've been so attracted by this idea at the point that I decided to work with this software from scratch and started self-teaching this software to me, just because of this idea of having multiple disciplines coming together in one single software, and especially starting to hybridize them. But I would say for starting off, we can stick to the modeling menu, and we are especially going to work with mesh. So you see that down here we have a shelf. We have several shelves actually, and the shelf we are on at the moment is the thematize according to curved surfaces, and we want to move to poly modeling so we can access the mesh tools. Okay, I'm going to move zoom commands away so I can see the rest of the interface. And you see that pretty much Maya is split in this sort of like a triptych organization. So in the middle, we have the viewport where we design and move objects around. This is our scene. On the left, we have the main organization of our viewing layout. And we have, for instance, one button here that I always try to keep open. And I usually tell my students to always keep open because it's an easy way in Maya to control what's in the scene. It's not really a layer chart. You also have layers in Maya, but that's coming in another panel. But it's tell you exactly what is on the scene, and you can easily select it and also do modification on that object directly from this which is called the outliner. And then of course you have the basic transformation tool, which are move, rotate, and scale. You have your scene, and then if you move on the right, you have what describe what you have on the scene. So if the first thing I want to do, I want to create a cube, and I want to make sure that I have my interactive creation on. The way to check that, you can go to create, polygon primitives, and you want to make sure that all the way down you have checked interactive creation. So this will allow you to create a box, basically sketching it in the scene instead of dropping it in the middle in the origin, right? So I'm gonna grab a box, and by pressing X, I can snap to the grid. And as you can see, I'm starting drawing the bases of this box. So I will release first, and then now Maya is giving me a hint. Basically, if I start to drag it, I will extrude this box upwards. Okay. So it doesn't really matter at the moment. We are kind of working scaleless anyway. So this is still something very blurred in the space and time for now. But of course, if you're working on a project, then units become important. Perhaps if we have time, we will go over it later on. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet, because I just take it for granted and I use it by default. As I said before, Maya is meant to be, is a software that is meant to be for character animations, video games, movies, and so on. So it tends to have, this is just full convention. It tends to have the Y axis up. I switch this to be Z up. In this way, I can work better when I need to bring stuff in and out from other architectural software like Rhino, for instance. And you can do that by accessing the general settings in Maya. Quick tip to access them: you can click on this guy that is running away here, and then you can move to the main settings, and you see that one of the first settings that you can set is this world coordinate system app axis, which I have set on Z. You can do that as well if you want. So yeah, going back to our box, like these elements that are here and refers only to the specific view that we have activated at the moment are part of the visualization system. And in here, I found certain icons that are pretty much self-explanatory. Like I can activate the shadow. I don't have any light at the moment, so I don't see them. Self-shadow will give us a bit of ambient occlusion. And then anti-aliasing, and then we can also turn on the edge display mode so we can see edges. Okay. So this is our first box. Let's say this is the object A. So we can go in the outliner and then double click on this object, and we can change the name of the object. Or in the same way, you see that as I select my object, I start to get some information here on the right. Here on the right, I have my attribute editor, channel box, and then other like two settings, which I anchored here, but usually it's not here by default. And especially the attribute editor is what I was mentioning before during that short presentation. So sort of this explicit history that allows us to go back in time and see what happened to the geometry that we have in the scene, of course, if we didn't delete the history. We can select the attribute editor, go to the polycube. This is the name of our object, polycube, and you see that it also carries a name in here. So we can change the name either from the outliner or go to the transform and change the name from here. So I can say call this the object A, and you see that the name also changes in my outliner. You probably don't see this little plus. This is because you can also control what you see in the outliner as well. And I'm going to show you in a bit how to make use of this. So this is our first object. We can create a second, and we can create a cube. How do we make sure we create exactly a cube? So we are kind of like dropping the cube in the scene, and then we control the size of the cube homogeneously. We select the cube, and then if we press Shift, we are basically scaling up our cube, and we make sure that all the dimensions are exactly the same. If I go to my channel box, I can find information about the cube. For instance, here I have the width, height, and depth, and I can go and manually change it, as well as I can select these items, and then with the middle mouse button, I can kind of like scroll as if it was for a slider. So I don't really bother about dimension for our objects at the moment, but we will see how these elements become important later on. So this is our object. As I said before, with this instrument that we have here on the left, we can apply the main transformation to the object. So if I select my object, you see that I get this sort of like gizmo, and then now it's set to the move command. Move command, you can call it with your keyboard by pressing W. And we can move the object in one direction, two direction, or 3D. If you press E, you can rotate the object, same way, and then R is to scale. Okay. I'm still giving a bit of introduction just for those of you who are opening the software for the first time. So these are the two objects. We also want to go and change the name to this guy and call it object B. All right. And then I want to introduce animation because at the moment, these two objects are basically static in the space. So like we are moving them around and rotating and scaling and so on, but there is no real animation set for the moment. So the way we control animation is by the bar that we found on the bottom. You see here, we have a time slider. And at the moment, this is set to be 120 frames. So we can increase the number of frames from here. For instance, we can drag in here, bring it to 200. But if 200 are not enough, we can increase this to, say, for instance, 250. And now, if we grab this little frame controller and we drag it around, we are basically moving through time. At the moment, nothing is happening in the software because we haven't set keyframes yet. The fastest way to set a keyframe, especially for the sake of our exercise, is by pressing S when we have our object selected. We need to make sure first that we place ourselves in the correct moment in time where we want to be. So I would say starting moment will be 0. I have my object B selected, and I want to press S to see what happens. As soon as I press S, you see that all the major properties of the object get this little highlighting red next to them, right? We have object B here, and we have all the attributes that are defining the object. So they are all keyframe at the moment. And at the same time, you see that here in the time slider, I got one little red line next to the 0, exactly where I set the keyframe, meaning that the object now is set in time at frame 0 within the information that we find on the right. If we scroll now all the way to the end, or you can also use this little button here, you see that these areas now are becoming kind of like pinkish, right? So the red dot got lighter. That means that the object is keyframe, but at the specific frame that you have selected, the object doesn't have a keyframe yet. So we can now take the object, move it, for instance, here. We can apply some transformation, scale it, rotate it, and so on. And we can press S again. You see that all these properties now, all these attributes change it, like the numeric values change it for all of them. And now we are locating ourselves at the end of the animation, and we set a keyframe, and we can tell by the fact that all these attributes are highlighted. So if I go back, to the beginning, the cube goes back to the initial state. If I play my animation now, I will see the object running through the other one. Okay, this is a very simple, basic way of setting up an animation in Maya. Of course, there are more kind of like specific way of controlling single aspects of our animated objects. For instance, in Maya, you need to know that you can animate pretty much everything, which is the great thing to me about it. It tends to become a bit crashy, so I'm a bit worried about today's tutorial as well, because we might incur in some issues. So let's try to hope everything goes well. But you can always go and select one single of these attributes, or even others that you find in the attribute editors. And then you see that if you press right-click pattern, you have the possibility to key select the single item. How do we set a animated Boolean? It's pretty intuitive. We need to set a Boolean with these two objects that are animated. So when setting a Boolean, I want to make sure, in this case, I want to use the Boolean difference. So I want to make sure I select my object A first, and second the object B. So first the object from which I'm gonna subtract the second object. And if I go to mesh option, first voice as Boolean, I can go to difference Boolean, and I want to open the option box here that is giving me the settings for operating this Boolean. In this specific case, I think it's a good practice when you do Boolean like such to use a legacy Boolean algorithm. This prevents the building up of weird edges condition and vertices that are not welded and not matching. So I have the two objects selected. I can simply say apply or apply and close. You see the object disappear. That's because at frame 1, the object hasn't yet intersected with the object B doesn't have yet intersected with object A. So if we scroll the animation, we should see it appearing here, around here, right, when it's passing through. Because ultimately the new object that we are seeing, which is called object A1, is the resulting Boolean of the two. So Maya is not really deleting. We don't see the other two objects anymore, but Maya is not really deleting them. It's kind of like keeping them ghosted in the system. And that sort of a history I spoke about. Also, you see this error. This is quite common. It's just Maya doesn't recognize the material anymore. You can fix this by selecting the object, right-click on your mouse, you go all the way down to assign new material. You can assign existing material Lambert 1, which was the one assigned before, and then you sort it. Okay, you can still select your two objects, although you can't really see them, and you can still apply changes to the keyframes. For instance, if I want to go to the next keyframe, I can click on this little button. So I make sure I'm snapping exactly to the next keyframe. And in here, I can still say, enlarge the object, rotate it farther if I want. And then I want to make sure I press S when I'm done with adjusting it. So now the animation also adapted to the new object configuration. One thing that is important, and I mentioned before about that, is that you can access more information about these objects, either by using the node editor, which I'm not going to go through today because it will require much more time, or going in the outliner, and for instance, you can uncheck the show that objects only. And so many other things will appear in your outliner. Two of them are the two primitives that we use, the polycube 1 and polycube 2. We should be able, and I don't want Maya to crash now. It did before for some reason, so I'm gonna just save this as step 1. You can go now and select either one or the other cube and change manually the number of subdivision. For instance, you can do the same thing with the other cube. And in case you need it, I'm showing this because sometimes I work with a procedural plugin in Maya called Mash, which also takes the faces of a polygon in order to organize, say, panelization. So it is very important that I'm able to control this afterwards. Okay. And then I think we can, and this is pretty much like a very kind of like starting exercise just to warm up with animated booleans. By the way, for those of you who don't know the visualization mode, you can press 4 on your keyboard to enter the wireframe mode. Then you can go back to 5, and then you have 6 to show the materials and 7 to also show lights, which we don't have at the moment. So this just allows me to better see what's happening also in our reviews. Okay. I think we can go back for a moment, and basically we could restart. I want to show you another way of working with booleans, which is quite interesting as well. So let's create our cube once again. So we do a bit of practice. And then pressing G, I can repeat the same command. Okay, I'm gonna do pretty much the same thing. So going back to our frame 0, press S, go all the way to the end. Let's control the passing through of this object. Transforming it a bit, pressing S again. And then if you want, you can introduce one middle keyframe, like here, for instance. Okay, and then pressing S, and this will affect the trajectory. Okay. And now what I want to do, I finally want to enter in the animation menu. Okay, so by entering the animation menu, we are going to visualize. First, we want to select our object B. We want to move to visualize, and then create animation snapshot. Let's open the option box. We want to make sure that the time range is set to time slider, so we have exactly the same length of our animation. And then the increment, basically this means every when Maya is going to bake the geometry in place, kind of like frozen in time along the animation. And this is an increment of 10, so it's like 10 frames. You should know that pretty much if you play the animation, like animation is based on like sort of like 24 frames per second. So it's just to get you an idea. I think 10 could work. Let's see if we apply. Oh, and by the way, updated. I always keep it on slow, so always update. That means that when I do further modification on the keyframe of the object, also these geometries will update along. So I can press apply and see what happens. So this is the transformation of my object in time. I can also press Z to go back, and if I want to change the increment, for instance, I can do it here, and I increase the increment. And this time, what I want to do, I want to introduce a Boolean that is between the static object, object A, and the transformations of object B frozen in time. That's why I made them. So I'll select my object A, and then I cannot select object B because it will be exactly the same result as before. If indeed you see that if I scroll through the animation, I can see my object moving along and following exactly the same trajectory. Instead, I want to create a Boolean between this object and all these little guys that I baked before. So I select my object, and then I want to make sure I open my snapshot group. And with Control, I select the first item and then Shift to get all of them. Now I can go back to modeling, mesh, Booleans. Let's move it here. And this time, I want to make sure, I don't think the legacy Boolean algorithm would work in this case. So I'm going to check it. And click Apply. These elements become ghosted, and this is the result that I get. So this is the subtraction. Of course, we can repeat the same with intersection, for instance, or other operations. But I would say this is, for this demonstration, this is probably the most interesting. So we can close it. Okay, my Maya got a bit stuck. Just trying to play the animation to show you that the object is still running there. And then a further parametric way of controlling this Boolean is by selecting this object and then going back to animation. We want to use visualize once again, and this time we want to create an editable motion trail. I can click on it. You see that I get this curve that is representing the trajectory in time. So it's kind of like specialized in time in a way, providing also the exactly number of the keyframe where I set keyframe. So for instance, I know that I have one at frame 142, and then one at the beginning, of course, frame 1, and then frame 250 at the end. This allows me to select one of them and quickly change the animation itself. Very cool thing in Maya is like when you are happy with the result, you don't need to disrupt history, right? So you keep this as your working file, and then you start to create copies of the design result. So what I would do, I would just copy this object by pressing Ctrl-V on the keyboard and move it away. And then I can do the same thing, making some adjustments. And create other example given the same type of animation. Sometimes Maya gets a bit glitchy, doesn't. Yeah, I guess like one good habit is not to move the first keyframe. Sometimes it gets issue. Gabe Mrs. Maya. Okay. It's just fun to do, and I think it's becoming more and more interesting as you start to merge different workflows. So, for instance, if this becomes the beginning of like more sort of like animated workflows where we introduce, for instance, texture deformers and things like that, that are like bringing another layer of complexity into the project. And of course, as I said, this is just coming from a the interface of one cube and one parallelepiped desiccate. So nothing really interesting, but imagine the potential with other geometries, of course, and also with multiple booleans. At the same time, you can take, for instance, two of the outputs, so like different moments frozen in time coming from the same object, and repeat the Boolean operations between the two. So, but this time perhaps you want to say intersect them. So you can grab one and press S, and then move it past the other object. I don't know what's going to happen, right? This is completely out of control at the moment. Press, oops, I did a mistake. Of course, you always need to remember that you have to scroll through before setting another keyframe. Otherwise, you're going to replace the first one you set. Okay, and I'm pressing S again. And then this time between these two, I might operate a Boolean. Let's try and do an intersection. Okay, not very interesting. So I would say we can select first object and second, and start to modify them in order to achieve a more interesting geometry in this case. Cool. I'm not gonna smooth these guys out because that's gonna be, it's not gonna look good, as we will need some manual tweaking and work on the vertices, as you can see. But we can still go and open our sort of like enhanced outliner and go and select our objects and tweak them a bit. Save first. Okay, and I think we still have a bit of time. So I also want to show you like another example that I was quickly sketching before, where we can actually control the voxelizing of these animated booleans. So I hope this doesn't crash, but for instance, in here we have one boolean that is subtracted to the other. Sorry, one object is subtracted to the other by boolean difference, and at the same time, the object, the resulting object is voxelized, and the components, the cells that are composing it, are also subject to a like an ID node that replaces certain items with others, depending to their proximity with the object that is abstracted. So I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but it's just a very simple case. Actually, it can get much more complex. And it's literally, so the cells are literally one solid and then one cube that has been emptied out and basically became a wireframe. And then if I play the animation, hope it doesn't crash, or I just scroll through. Apart from some glitchy moment, we have this object that is passing through and is determining these the organization of the cells within the solid that we set to be the sort of like container. This is done in a procedural way, so using MASH, which is a completely different thing. And I think I wish we had a time maybe to do another session in the future where we can properly introduce MASH as well, which is a super cool tool that I use a lot in Maya. And I can control the influence of this guy, of this boolean that is going through. By the way, the boolean is not, you cannot see it here, but it was basically like just a very simple, I know it looks a bit weird at the moment. You can't identify that into a cube anymore, of course, but it was literally just a cube from which I took the faces and I create a spiked element just by extruding the faces. So you should all know, I mean, those of you who have worked with the software before, that we can assess the component level, which we haven't touched yet today. But if you right click on with the object selected, you can either access the vertex, the edges, or the face mode. And for instance, if I select the face mode, I can now start to select the faces of the object and, you know, like operate in the same way I would do before at the object level, but on components. So I can select all my faces, and then with Control E, I can extrude them. And what I did before was like keeping faces together off. So extrude every face singularly. And then just, you know, giving it a bit of offset. I think 0.1. Something like this. Maybe even more. It's too much. Okay, it's getting a bit laggy. And then beveling the edges to create a more interesting shape. That would then become the shape that is obviously in a large version of this the shape is being subtracted to this very simple parallelity. Okay, and this is basically from this guy and a cube we can easily get to this. Okay. I can hear sounds. I don't know if that means that we are running out of time.
It is fine.
It's fine. I'm hearing all the types of sounds. I never heard so many sounds in Zoom before. Okay, but yeah, this is just to show you like another application of this. It's quite interesting to me. I mean, like it's very interesting to think. And if you think about how this could become sort of like a kinetic space where actually what is controlling the Boolean is the user. This is of course like another level you can bring this workflow to. And yeah, I think that's it pretty much. If it's okay, we can stop here.
Okay, perfect. It was simple, but a super nice effect. Thank you for that. I don't know if the students would like to ask some questions about the workflow or some specific question about the form or something like that.
Sure.
Or you can write your questions maybe. Some people have been using Maya, right, in our exercises. So.
Hi. Just very simple question. I think it might be a little obvious answer, not really, I don't know, transcendent. I don't know how to say that. But I was just wondering, like, why the choice of programs? How do you prioritize the software that you use in order to get the results that you want? And well, why? Because we were speaking in class that they all follow like the same logic. So that's really interesting because we kind of learn to speak the language, and then all the programs, well, we can, like, we get the basics, but I do think there are still like many differences between, I don't know, Rhino and Maya or whatever. So what questions do you ask yourself to prioritize that?
Sure. No, it's a great question. I think it's something that we all have common with as computational designer, that we also explore different software, different realms, and then we get to a point where we start to have workflows that better adapts to the way we like to work. In my specific case, as I said before, I started to get interested by Maya because of the possibility of animating objects, and at the same time, not just for the sake of producing animation, which at the time when I was working on it, you know, like whoever would start to learn a software for animation's sake will be just to, you know, present the work with a walkthrough or some sort of like animated render. In my case, it was more about the possibility of injecting time into the design process, and Maya gave me that opportunity. I used to work in Rhino, Grasshopper as well. I'm still using all of them, but it was never so handy as in Maya to me to just, you know, like control the time slider. I haven't showed you today. There are multiple ways, of course. We haven't touched on the graph editor, but there are literally people who becomes professional and focus all their life on those little items in Maya, and they just control curves on how time is interpolated and manipulated just to change a little effect, usually in the way like a character move or this type of things, not in architecture, of course. But I thought, like, I got immediately fascinated, and I started to work with Maya in that way. Then it's absolutely true, like what you're saying is also bringing up an interesting question, because then now the way that I use the same software, exactly the same software in the office is completely different. So it's a completely destructive way of working with Maya, just by deleting history every time, just because it doesn't need to carry information and then overload the file. And so Maya is also great, I must say, as a polygon modeling tool, as other software are, like Blender, for instance. I know that the Rhino is catching up, especially with the latest version that just got released with the sub-Ds. But before, there was this big duality between working with polygons and working with NURBS. And I was, you know, like I got adapted to work in NURBS and Rhino and work with polygons in a software like Maya. And of course, you can do different things. I'm not going to say they are all the same exactly. So there are workaround to kind of mimic what a software is doing. I found myself many times to kind of mimic what Houdini is doing in Maya, for instance. But the software are different at many levels and do different things.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alejandra. Is there another question?
Yeah, I would just add that I'm touching a little bit of, about what Gabriel said earlier about researching in architecture from architectural form, let's say. I think I'm glad that you chose this kind of exercise, because it's very I don't know, telling about how you can use time as and give it a material condition, or actually like a tectonic quality to generate a form finding exercise. I think that was really interesting.
Yeah,
well,
like
I was telling Nick, which I have to say, I love him. You know, but yeah, so it's like I miss Maya so much. I mean, it's like, unfortunately, I think, the times or whatever. I mean, my roots are Maya, so I've always been, I've always taught Maya. And I think Maya has really a great potential for those kinds of things. Is, in a sense, is very much about sculpting. There's so much sort of, yes, a difficult solver, but there's so much intuition to it that really goes and get really very strong design sense to it, right? So I think, and I think it's unfortunate that we're losing the Maya tradition, in a way, because precisely those form finding exercises that you know how to do that. And, sort of in terms of political modeling and subdivision, which is really the kind of really strong aspects of Maya, whatever. And now we have to adapt a lot of the stuff to kind of work with nurseries and really kind of, it's funny. I started teaching Rhino like a million years ago, whatever. And then, so then I sort of, and I haven't taught it in so long or whatever. And then I now have to go back and I kind of rethink of Rhino in so many ways, to kind of teach it in a kind of much more sort of design sense as a medium rather than as a software. And I think it's really limited in certain ways. Because of that, I don't know. And when Nick shows this, I mean, it's just so amazing to see it, because it's, there's so much potential in Maya, and I wish it really comes back. I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
I completely agree. From the point of view of a person who's not just teaching it, but I'm fortunate enough to work in one of those few practices in the world that are actually deploying Maya, especially in the concept stage. Let's say it's a love and hate relationship, I would say, in a way, because once you start to get more serious, you get to the construction level, like, whatever you do in Maya, you have that love moment, you are freely expressing yourself. And then in your mind, some corner of your mind, you have this thought that, yes, whatever I'm doing now, I'm going to pay it later, because then there is the rationalization moment. This is also true, but I must admit that I got a bit lazy. So I started to get better and better with Grasshopper and other software. And I was like, okay, why should I go back to Maya now that I can do maybe pretty much the same thing with Grasshopper and Rhino? It will never get that sort of feeling as Gabriel was talking about, right? I will never get to the same result. I noticed this with time. And then I stopped doing that. I said, like, doesn't matter. I get a better result whenever I go back to Maya and I do the exercise properly, no matter if later on I have to rationalize. And also I do this sort of like experiment with my students in Italy, and they're coming from almost no background in computation, like they do AutoCAD and that's it. And when I teach them Grasshopper on one hand and Maya on the other, you immediately see this sort of like there is this split personality, right? You can kind of like draw a pool of who's going to choose one or the other. And I must say most of them love Maya within the same sort of like love and hate, because of the crashy moments, because of the troubleshooting and all of that we all know. But most of them still remain amazed by the software, even in times where we have Houdini and many others, like processing, whatever.
It is true, because I think, well, there's so many ways to model in Maya anyways, right? So there's so many techniques that can do that. I mean, and I think it's different. I mean, for us, our technique was also T-tool and S-tool, so it's like, sort of just model like that or whatever. It's sort of like kind of forming sort of, sort of kind of going through the motions and kind of like, almost plane by plane or surface by surface, you start kind of modeling in a really interesting way. And it's very intuitive. And I think, yes, in spite of the kind of sometimes those difficulties that is, all those things that happen, there is really something so specific about Maya in so many ways, and the results are very, very different. And I think once the software, what I love about what Nico's doing and a lot of his generation is doing is really that they really have no biases anymore about softwares, right? So we grew up with Maya, and then suddenly Maya was not good because it's like the smooth surface project was not really cool anymore, blah blah blah. So we don't do that. And then, you know, his group, which I absolutely love all of them, you know, they're like, they really have no biases. It's like, okay, Maya's cool, we can do this. We're not there, they don't have, you know, sort of those sort of myths about, well, we cannot do a smooth surface project. We cannot do, you know, a this type of project. So it's like, so it's really about, it's about the medium of the exploration. And I think this is really, I think this is where we are right now, I think, in a way that, you know, this new generation is non-biased about the software, so whatever. Unfortunately, the post-digital generation that I, you know, deal with, they were really, really against that. So it's kind of, sort of, in a way, sort of Rhino became the thing, you know, whatever. It's like, okay, so Rhino is where it's at. And I think now, I think this new generation is pushing for all kinds of other explorations that go beyond that. And I really think the kind of push of Houdini or other things, the return of Blender, you know, stuff like that, you know, sort of like, it's really amazing to see that, you know, so once, you know, softwares that were like, well, you know, we don't want to do that because they produce this kind of biased project that we don't like, whatever. And now it's really sort of, you know, very, I think the atmosphere is changing and it's very different. I don't know what Nico thinks, but I really believe that.
No, I totally agree. I must say, I've seen a bit of what you're talking about because of my background. So like coming from Italy, moving to the US, I started to see that. Although, well, especially in a school like GSD. Although I think I was fortunate enough to be completely naive in the way I approach the software, I would say so, because coming from a school which doesn't teach you about software, it just gives you dogmas about the forms, right, that you are supposed to produce. Once I came to the US, I had this strong interest in animation, in time injection. And then I didn't really have all this kind of like background on what even like my educators at that time would think about me using a certain software versus the other. So I approached Lee in a natural way, in a natural manner, naively, if you want. And I think there was a lucky moment at the end. It turned to be a strength in a way. So yeah, I can see what you were talking about. At the same time, I'm quite happy that I freed myself from that preconception. And I must say at the same time that now that I find myself in a completely different situation in London, where you have all these so like AA and Bartlett background, right? So a completely different situation, the ADRL and so on, and working at Zaha particularly. We still have that sort of condition, but as I said before, I'm quite fortunate to work in an office that is deploying Maya and is turning into, I mean, it's kind of like legitimated a bit more than what happened before by just using it in an academic environment, right? So Zahadid is really demonstrating, Zahadid Architects is really demonstrating that whatever crazy Maya shape I'm doing on the screen now in front of you in 40 minutes can turn in an amazing building if carried on in a certain way with all the expertises and so on. I think that's great.
No, and at the end is really all about the workflow at this point. So it's really, so in a way we're talking about saying, well, you know, it's not really that all is going to be a Maya platform or a Rhino platform, which a lot of it is, you know, so far right now, but really it's really about the workflow and is really the kind of like hacking your workflow and really kind of pushing, you know, the issue in a different way. And so really sort of why, you know, it's like, you know, Nico was talking about at the beginning saying, well, you know, Maya was not meant for this, but we hacked it, our architects did that. And we need to do a lot more of that. It's like, you know, sort of use it in ways that are not meant to be and really kind of move it forward. That's really, to me, what I understand the new digital turn is about. You know, sort of like, you know, it's not about the conformity of this of the platforms. It's really about the workflow. It's really about inventing new ways and all that. And I think this is a really important, you know, sort of moment. So a conference like this really begin to open for me is really important, and really I'm really interested in doing this because it really sort of begin to sort of open up for the students to think, okay, yeah, so maybe I was not that interested, or maybe I was taught in this platform, but for me, it's really all about designing my workflow and really sort of, you know, sort of working within that idea, which is kind of my appropriation of what I think technology should be or how I use it for my work. And so I think this is an important moment because of that.
Absolutely. I really agree with Gabe. Totally agree on that. I mean, again, I've been speaking so much about, interdisciplinarity or like other fields driving my attention, and starting a project from scratch just because I was interested in some uh, whatever physics corollary or whatever,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I started a project on that. So this is important, and I think it should be burning inside every student. And that's also what keeps you learning, because the problems you'll face, especially when you start mixed workflows, will be so many. And if you are not
Yeah.
pushed enough from a very strong interest, it probably it's not going to work. I agree with that. I mean, imagine when I speak with not my peers, not my colleagues, but other people who are not in the fields, and you say, you are an architect, and you also teach, or what are you specialized in? And I say, well,
Yeah, they always
I,
ask you.
I time, and they say, what? You are an architect. I would expect you talking about space, and I start talking about time. It's
Yeah,
that's the type of thing I'm quite interested in, and also I'm always trying to get that out from students, so to try to understand their psychology in a way and what they are really into, because that's gonna stick in the way they work. I think as educator, we all do that at some point.
Well, like, it's a lot of things. What you're saying is really true because, for me is really, I mean, like I was saying earlier in my presentation, really, I mean, yes, okay, it's really important to have a technological expertise. That's critical for us. But at the same time, to me, the argument is really what makes you an architect. It's really is like, okay, I use it because I do this, because I do that, because I believe in this, because it really helps the discipline this way, et cetera. So I think to me, there's a disciplinary sense about sort of thinking that. And when Nico says it's exactly correct, it's really like, they have to sort of figure out what they are about, what their agendas could be, what their arguments are sort of built up around, whatever. And I think institutions like SIRE really does that very well, right? It's like you're really sort of making you define through the thesis project really what your interests are, and things like that. And I think we need more of that. It's not the kind of be technical savvy, but be sort of architectural savvy in terms of using the medium. Not to me, it's not the issue of the tool, it's the issue of technology as the medium, the software as a medium, as the kind of the things that we work with in a way. So once that kind of paradigm really establishes itself, whatever, I think we're in good side. So I think a lot of the stuff that the group that Nico's part of, the design morphine or whatever, they're really, really important because I think they're kind of pushing that idea. Really sort of they're educating, they're democratizing in so many ways technology. They're educating it through using the internet to do this and all that, and really sort of distributing that kind of agency and knowledge, which I think is really so important, right? So I just love what they do because I think that's so important. And it's really, that's the right moment, right? Again.
It's exactly the right moment. And I think returning a little bit to the question, I think it's not, I think it's the way we're working. It's not about the software, it's about the workflow and the procedures that we're teaching to them. So it's not just like one specific technique, it's just like a strategy or something related with architecture with many other inputs that they can develop during the course. And well, we have another question. I think it's the same student. So,
Hi, sorry. It's really fast, and you both sort of answered it well during the last things you were saying, but also this comes from a very personal experience with all these programs and this short time that I've been learning how to use these things. But I find that personally for me, when there are so many options and so many possibilities, it becomes very hard to center it and to find a way, like a design process that is more simple. I don't know how to explain it, but I think about for example, when one asks something to a child and they see it like in a very simple way that we forgot to see because of everything that we've learned during our lives. And I find that this happens a lot with the programs, that sometimes, personally, I think that like in my design process, it's just, I can start with something like, I don't know, Legos, or I don't know, something very, very simple, like just basic shapes. And then when I enter this world of like endless possibilities, I find it's very hard, to like bring it down, center it down, and yeah, I don't know how else to say it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, I see what you're saying, whatever. And I think it really, it's, I mean, I think it's really, there's the two things, right? Is like, okay, so one is the thing about the basics of it, and really sort of for the basic reasons or whatever, or, you know, software that really can do a lot of things. So it's good to know. And then you can say, well, I can go back to basics, right? And then do that. And it's really there, you know, Rhino for me, for example, as a platform is like the United Nations. Like everything is there, and it's a really great negotiator between a lot of files and a lot of different things, right? So it can do really good things and whatever, right? I think like that. But I think, you know, sort of, you know, it's like, you know, you can start with a platform like this or whatever, but then I think the connection to other workflows, it really has to begin to emerge from there. It's like, you know, the kind of within your own interests. So like if you said you're already done a lot of different explorations and other softwares, etc. I think you need to establish that connection to think, well, maybe what I did in, you know, when I was shrink wrapping in Blender, I really love that, and I really want to do this. Or, you know, I sort of, you know, there's nothing like subdiv in Maya, whatever. So it's like there's immediate these kind of connections they have to establish, and really, you know, even the logics of importing files from one to the other, and you start, you know, you would realize, you know, how they come into the other software, whatever, all the things that you need to tweak, all that stuff. So I think you have to imagine that and never think of, you know, apples and oranges. And I'm sure that's not what you meant, but it's really, I don't think there is such a thing in there. I think that's really a little bit of an illusion. They just like, okay, I want something that is really quite simple. Otherwise, then just use ArchiCAD or something like that, whatever, right? So, you know, whatever. So, but if you know, but doing something a little bit more interesting and whatever, it's really, you know, I think it's really your own inquiry. I don't know.
I agree with what Gabe said. I would just add, yeah, I mean, nowadays we're living in the sort of, you know, this like image-based society. And as we were mentioning before, design morphine, you just scroll the feed and so many different options and coming out of different software, and you're asking yourself like, which way should I go? So I would rather separate this and then get to another message where, as I was trying to pointing out from that's also the reason why I didn't want to show you. I mean, I wasn't meant to do a lecture or present my work or anything, but I just wanted to show you a few works just to, you know, build this link with what I was showing today on the screen during the tutorial. And you can see that there are different takes on each project, but there is some sort of like coherency, consistency, and it's all coming down to the what I found with time, obviously. Okay, just practicing it. What I found to be the thing that is moving me towards architecture, towards being a better designer, and so on. My interest at the end of the day. And that's why I'm really pushing on the fact that not like you shouldn't like personalize the software that you're working with, but in a way, yes, you should establish a certain relationship with it. And when I speak about feelings with Maya, like hate and love with the software, you know, and then move into and Gabe did exactly the same thing when he spoke about his relationship with Rhino, right? And we pretty much feel in the same way. I think that's really important. That's something that many people don't tell you. There is always this, and I'm sure like what I can see from the result that is in this specific academic assets that Daniela and these other amazing educators are filling up in there. It's also happening in a different way. But I can tell, I've experienced myself in a certain academic institution and other fields, that there is a way of teaching software that is like, you know, like a sort of like a second league type of education, where it's just like this cold way of giving you a tutorial, like you do this A, B, C, and then brings you to D, and that's it. And you need to know that, then to use, you know, like learn the workflow and bring it into the design studio and do what. And that's also why I think it's so great, the T4T lab. I mean, it's exactly the same reason. You're bringing together these two things, make this more a dialogue rather than, you know, like a compartmentalized way of teaching the software will really help you. And then it comes with time to me. Like it really takes time for you to understand what is your what is your message, why you're so attached to what you're studying and devoting so much time to, because at the end of the day, you're really spending the best time of your life on education and architecture. And I know all of that, we all been through that. So at the end of the day, I think that's the main point. I wouldn't let, you know, I wouldn't just go on the flow of the river of all these software that are coming along and all these images bombarding me from Instagrams and other socials and say, okay, this is cooler than that. I should stop learning this software and move to the other. That's probably not leading anywhere.
No, I mean, I think it's very true. You know, I mean, it's a question of, you know, it's a way of teaching it as well, right? It's like, for example, like, you know, when I first started teaching, for example, Rhino, it was really very, it was very sort of like, it was very much about the technique, like you do this and you do that, and then, you know, you pull down the menu this way, or you can memorize, you know, whatever the icon, I mean, all these things, right? But then now the way I teach it now is really, you know, I don't do tutorials myself, obviously, but the way then I take it to the studio, knowing that the students now are being taught whatever, is really like we just base it on operations. So it's like I start exploring, let's say, Boolean, or I some Boolean difference and Boolean union, or then we start sort of, you know, doing, you know, exercises on extrusion or of lofting, or, you know, all the stuff. And then we do the one on revolve, whatever. So we start kind of exploring the different ways that all the kind of operations that Rhino has as kind of design tools, not just like, okay, you know, you can pull down the menu or type, you know, Boolean or whatever, you can do this. No, but like, what can you do with Boolean? What can you do with love? What can you do with sweep? Or you can do all these things, right? And I think it's really more sort of using that, going beyond the tool to the precisely the notion of the medium. And I think, you know, my way is a little more difficult to do that simply because there's so many extensive aspects of it. And really, you can really talk about a lot of different things, and depending on how you're working with specifically, because you can do everything in there as well, right? So, but towards the notion of animation is really sort of, for me, really be really important, right? So I think kind of teaching with a certain focus, I think, is really what happens. You know, sort of, for example, Nico, I think, you know, he's really interested in teaching Maya because of factor of time, which is not time, it's called duration, actually. Yeah, because he's a Bergsonian. So he's a Bergsonian. So it's called duration, but we just, whatever. So he's interested in duration. He wouldn't say it, but that's what it is. You know, so I think it starts to sort of thinking about it, you know, in that sense. And so I think once you start kind of thinking that the softwares really begin to exemplify certain conditions about form making or the certain arguments of time, duration, etc. I think this is the kind of specificity that we sort of start finding in going from maybe what Alejandro was asking, sort of going from some kind of straightforward, more generic to a lot more specific, but to me would be more sort of studio oriented, pedagogically savvy about, you know, what kind of projects you want. So I want a Maya project because of this, or Maya influence project, or I want a Rhino project, like I do a lot now, is really that but I want it to be this way, you know? So I think that's really a lot of the kind of depth of the exploration that we need to start looking for in so many levels, right? So Nico needs to give us a lecture on duration. That's the one I want to hear.
That's why I started to introduce the term entropy, actually.
I know. You know, so
no, but you're
no, I'm a huge Bergsonian too. I mean, I also am. You know, so no, but I think it's really part of that. Sorry, we're extending the conversation, but just like we just can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Actually perfect to just like end all these 2 days of lectures and tutorials. So thanks for the question, Alejandra. So we started the conversation. I don't know if there's
I could just talk and talk and talk.
I don't know if there's another question from the students. I think most of them are leaving because they might have another class.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so we're holding them back.
But the ones that are staying, I don't know if they have other question.
So I mean, I'm curious. I mean, oh well, so they have a question. So
there's another one.
Nick should answer that, because you guys do that a lot. through Design Morphine and with Michael and you and all those guys.
But just to link back to what you said, to be honest, with Design Morphine, I must be totally honest about it. At some point, I stopped doing this, so like webinars or, I mean, you can tell that it's different, right? As you said before, we are trying to, of course, you experienced it yourself during this academic year, we are trying to teach in a certain way. I mean, you cannot escape the fact that like reducing it to just a simple basic tutorial, a tooling, like just doing this and this and that is not really going to work. It's less exciting for us. It's not where we are, first of all. And so that's also like a little issue that I had, being one person who's also doing these things with like kind of like nomadic platforms like Design Morphine or others. So we started to do everything online, and then these reduced everything into simple like tooling session, which I like less. Before they were, of course, they were very intensive workshops, completely integrated with like teaching several tools. But at the end of the day, a student, even in a couple of days, would present a project out of that. And that, I think that was the big thing, and that's what I really like. So I can see the market in terms of like tutorials and getting exhausted pretty fast, to be honest. I wouldn't expect it to get exhausted that fast. It's been like not even 1 year that I've been living in this condition. And look at I was looking recently at some like data about the number of tutorials that came up in the internet during this pandemic. And it's insane. So it's really getting exhausted. And I can see new platforms coming up and flourishing every day. But pretty much trying to, like differentiate the package, the wrapping, but at the end of the day, the content is pretty much the same. It's a bit repeating. So I'm not sure how long-term this will be, but for sure, as it's happening today, I mean, this new format that is becoming more and more part of our normality is opening up many opportunities, many possibilities. I'm seeing, like, I see recently there is something coming up called Illusor or something like that. It's sort of like a virtual reality platform where you're supposed to enter as an avatar, completely designed by architects, things like that. They're coming up. Everything's super interesting for sure. But I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say this is particularly like strictly related to the software that we are using at the moment. Then at the end of the day, in this sense, we are delivering in tutorials, if I understood what the question was about.
But I would say to that, since you mentioned also, and there's a question also of democratization. I'll talk about it later. But what I think is that what is good. I can see what you're saying is good and bad or whatever, because then there's way too much offer and you don't really know what the quality of the offer is. Just like the Design Morphine would be a really good quality, but you don't really know. I haven't really seen a lot of seminars, but I do get tons of invitation of like people doing seminars. The big difference about what I would say sort of doing webinars or this stuff versus face-to-face is really that there is really this kind of moment of the question or whatever, right? So some kids I really have a good sense of really picking up online things or whatever, but a lot of them really need a lot of personalized attention. Having taught sort of all kinds of sort of workshops and inviting people to do workshops, and we did it face-to-face, etc. So now we have a lot of difficulties, a lot of adjustments, teaching different classes, these things, because like there is that element of like there is the needed for specific attention that some students need to have at a certain moment that really you cannot offer because of that reason, right? So I think it's kind of generalized and it disseminates in a good way, but also it restricts other type of attention that's pedagogically needed to certain students. So there is a pro and a con, and but at the same time I really find myself teaching studios online, that I had to train a lot to actually do it. I just did a studio that I really liked or whatever, and was successful. But I had a sort of, I trained a little bit in the summer, really thinking about how to do it again. It's just really not the same thing at all, right? So it's like, you have to sort of sit down, but the delivery has to be very different. The pausing has to be very different. I mean, so there's a lot of dynamics, which extends the time to be sort of twice as long, maybe, to do it. But in order to do it well, I mean, I think you have to sort of rethink everything you're doing. It cannot be just kind of a simple translation, right? So I think there is a lot of trickiness, or there is a lot of tricks that need to happen when you teach online, et cetera, which is different from a studio to a tutorial or a webinar, whatever. So I think there is part of that, and and then the quality either way can suffer. And I would, the question about sort of democratization, I was thinking that what is important is really that. So especially in many places where, like I was telling in my conversation or my presentation, that a lot of places in Latin America, and maybe I was completely off base, but place that I've been is really always seen technology as something that you admire, or in general, even professors, there's inside the schools there's resistance from the professors, sort of acquiring certain type of technology simply because seems sort of antithetical to ideas about sort of phenomenology and all the things that they become super interesting at one point, in the culture, in Latin American culture specifically, right? So the democratization is important because it really sort of takes that knowledge of the software to all kinds of kids all over the world, right? So, and maybe they don't have that access to it, and I think that's super, super important to demystify the notion of what the software is and really to include that. And at the end, it's too bad that Casey's not here, but I think, to be at the level of Casey, which he's just designing his own software. It's like he's designing the whole thing, right? Because the level of that, which this really what we all would have lived like to aspire to be, right? To get to that level of proficiency, right? But I think democratization is really important because, and I think the internet is really what gives you that ability, because, a lot of places there is no dissemination, right? Of those softwares, or there's really not. There's no way to do it other than that.
I was looking at the very last questions that we got while you were talking. Okay, can you separate the process and logic from the program? Are these algorithms translatable to other forms of producing? I would be interested, actually, I don't know if we have time, but I'll be interested actually to ask a question to Gabe about his experience, early work of Peter, since we are both coming.
Yeah, we both came from the Peter world.
Exactly. And we might think about Peter as one of those figures who, like he kind of like anticipated a certain workflow. I think Greg was calling him the first parametric guy. So I don't know. I think this kind of relates to the last question that we just got. Like it's not really, it's more about it's a tool, right? At the end of the day, but there are ways to kind of like think around the tool.
I mean, yeah, there is a way to think about the tool or whatever, but I think a lot of I'm reframing the work of Peter, obviously. So it wasn't framed like that when I had him, certainly. It's but obviously the impact that he does, that it gives you or leaves you, is like it lasts forever, right? So it's something you can never shake, and you don't really want to shake at this point. But now I think what is important about of doing that really has to do with more the question of intelligence, right? So Peter sort of produces you or makes you understand the importance of what we will call now design intelligence. But there is that kind of logic of design and logic of thinking that has to do with knowing the basis, right? Maybe it's irrelevant to know Brunelleschi or Alberti or Bramante or Carlo Rinaldi or whatever, right? Maybe that's not important, to a lot of people. But in the logic of that, I think, in the conversation about design intelligence is a really good point of departure, and how to argue the discipline, from different points of view. I think it starts, in positions like that, right? So Peter's intelligence or whatever, or the lack sometimes of intelligence, is really sort of important, because now that we're moving to artificial intelligence, it's like, okay, but we haven't defined actually what design intelligence is to begin with, right? So what do we think about artificial intelligence? Now we're thinking about artificial intelligence, and do we really know, or what do we call artificial intelligence to begin with, right? And I think so I think that's really what Peter's become relevant again, and I think it was really invited everywhere. And I think this situation of Zoom has really sort of again put Peter everywhere, whatever. And of course, the release of the book Lateness, which is really fantastic. So I think that's important because it really reunites two conditions: the idea of what is what we call intelligence, and what is that knowledge base, in the canonical sense, and really how do we sort of take that within the studio and all the combination of practices, analog and digital, all the way to really apply new forms of intelligence, but really understanding what that combination would be. If you don't know, it's like, well, it's just a technology, whatever, but there is really, if we don't know I don't know what design intelligence is to begin with, or intelligence in architecture, much less would I know why am I doing this, right? So I think that's really, and to me, that's what Peter brings to the table, has always brought to the table, argued in different points, but I think it's really now kind of rethinking of what Peter is giving us now, or the importance of it, that Nico and I share, is really precisely that. And I think at one point in my life, when I was really sort of super into, when I began to be super involved with digital technology, I was began to sort of shy away from that, and I decided, no, I never go back to Peter, blah, 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 whatever. And then when I started teaching very seriously here at A&M, I realized I better start teaching these kids some of those lectures, because it's not going to happen. So in 2013, I started teaching Bramante and Brunelleschi and Piranesi and all the stuff that I absolutely love, right? Whatever. So it was a really joy to teach it, whatever. And really, I can tell you that the level exponentially changed, miraculously, right? So I think there is something to say about teaching those kinds of things, right? So maybe Nico, being Italian, he's biased about the importance of these things, right? But I think there is a big change. I mean, it's like, if you know Serlio and you understand what Serlio is, I'm doing research on Serlio right now, etc. So I think knowing Serlio, I think makes a big difference, I think. So I don't know if that answered the question about intelligence, in a sense of how it was framed, but and the thing that we shared about the Eisenman years or whatever.
No, I absolutely agree. Actually, to me, it was that really was the epiphany, right? The moment where I've been taught about classic and Renaissance architecture in Italy for about 5 years in a very schematic way. And then I got to read some books from Peter, and it was like completely reinventing it, right? Giving it a new meaning. And it was the very first time that I understood it. So no, I understand what you're saying. No, totally agree. I think I was more trying to think about how to link the second Peter. So like once the second steps after let's say like the moment that this consciousness of the past translated right. into the new process, right? I don't know if based on your personal experience, you have worked on a different set of tools, including design software and so on, within the office, within Peter, and understood what was the logic behind, how the gap was overcame. Because one of the last questions was about how do you separate the process and the logic from the program? Like, can you achieve the same results without having any knowledge of a specific, of a certain software? I would say yes and no, in a way. I don't know what you think about it, but I think Peter it's relevant in this term as well, right? I don't know if this was my personal experience, but I found it extremely relevant the way he positioned himself, after all this knowledge, that by the way, was facilitated by the use of the computer, of course, but then when it comes to his personal work, that's also something that it's so digital and analogical at the same time. And I always, when I got to the office, I always questioned myself, he was my idol at the time, and I was wondering how he would achieve that level of complexity. And then I cannot say how, but there is an interesting clashing moment of all this theoretical background and these new digital tools coming at hand.
Well, I think it's interesting. The question is really good, because I think there's a really famous sort of video somewhere that's still around or whatever, where Peter is at the Angevante. I think this is in 2005, somewhere around that time, 2004. And Peter is really sort of is in a review, and he's with Wolf Pre, whatever, and they're presenting the student is presenting some super cool Maya project or whatever, very at the moment with Annie Akevand, it was like super, super amazing, right? And Peter's really stops and saying, you know, sort of like, does it really, so his question is that, does it really matter if the kids know, you know, sort of Palladio, blah, 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 whatever, right? And then just kind of like, they just start sort of, you know, so spontaneous with this kind of spontaneity, whatever, start to build something in Maya and whatever, and that's really good enough, right? And obviously Wolf said, yeah, I don't think that's a problem, whatever. And Peter reacts to that, says like, no, it's like a monkey playing the piano, whatever. It's like, you don't really know what you're doing, right? And I think in Peter, you know, I was not close to Peter, you know, at the time that he was really entering the world of computers. But if you really think, you know, there is really the kind of, you know, a way that Peter thought there was really, in a way, very, very, you know, very, very much in that sense. But I think when you look at the church of the year 2000 or whatever, right, there is really the application of computers, but in a very interesting way, in a way that, you know, he understands what the computer can do and is using the computer to be part integral of the part of it, of the process, right? You can tell by the articulation of the ground and things that he's doing, right? So it's like using the computer as part of the process. And so what it can do as the process. And I think that's really what I find interesting in Peter's work from the very earlier on, of the earlier manifestations of using, you know, digital technology. That it didn't come to modify the work. It came to reassert some of the things that he was already doing, and introducing, I think, the computer or computation as really a very integral part of the design methodology, right? So it was very intertwined. So I don't think there was like a separation between the process and the concept and the process or whatever, because there was such a thing as a computer, right? The worst case scenario is obviously that the computer is really just the documentator, or, you know, digital softwares document what you're doing, right? So I think to me this is really, I try not to separate those things, what the process is, to do that. I mean, I think the era of explaining process is over. So we're not really that interested in the process, as long as the process is an integral part of the design. You know, it's really part of the workflow in a sense. That to me, that's really important. But I try to think, you know, maybe I'm very naive to think that, you know, you don't want to separate those two. You want to make them, you know, sort of be part of the same thing. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way I would think about it, you know?
I agree. I agree. In a way, sort of like, I would say you introduce what I am as a designer in a way. Like, yeah, we've been talking so much about this idea of like trying to stick together the process and what you're aiming for, and the final output as a single entity. And this can also, I think, can also display in the results from, say, like your studio class or whatever. You can really smell that. And I totally agree that Peter overcame those notions. So that was in a way to kind of like respond to the latest question, where it was like, yeah, you need the tool in a way, of course, like if it's part of your process and your process is exactly reflecting what you are, what you want to express, what you want to convey at the end. So I totally agree, because this was this. I think that within the last question, Alejandro was kind of like questioning the democratization of these tools by the, you know, like concretely speaking about by the accessibility of licenses and so on. But I would say that's part of the game.
Yeah, it's part of the hacking game, literally and not literally. You know, no, I mean, I think there's really something really, you know, sort of quite interesting about that, and the you know, I think we always tend to make that separations between the process and not whatever, but I don't think we should no longer do that. I mean, I think it's just they're all intertwined, right? And I think that's really part of it. And the democratization to me means the idea, whether it's really licensed or unlicensed or whatever, right? It really has to do with the understanding that those exist and they perform certain things that are integral to the workflow, and you know, and and knowing about them or knowing how to use them or whatever, in a sense, begins to democratize them. You know, I'm nothing against hacking them or not or whatever. We've done that in my studio as well. So it's not like, you know, we haven't done that, whatever, right? But it really depends on the final sort of purpose of this, right? So I think it's part of that. And you know, I mean, to me, this conversations are important because they really sort of begin to exemplify a lot of the struggles, I guess, that we go through, you know, teaching the same thing. So a lot of the stuff that I'm sure you guys are thinking about, we also go through those things. And the students that we teach also go through the same questions. It's like, so what is this for all about? And then finally, you know, I don't know, I'm extending the time, but I wanted to bring this, which I think is important, which is the idea of, you know, the idea of medium or whatever. So I think to me, one of the important things, you know, the post-digital generation, specifically, you know, possible mediums, that group of people, you know, what they brought is really an idea. Of course, there's really a certain, you know, a certain sort of position in regards to digital, although it's digital, but they have a certain reserve about that in general. But I think the introduction also into the process of thinking that there are other mediums, anything can be a medium, and you can build a project, you know, even in an analog fashion, using anything you can think of, right? And I think that kind of sense of liberation of like sort of finding those kinds of things have become integral to me to understanding a lot of what, you know, the project could be today. So even the design process in the kind of is not linear. It's really, the workflow is analog and digital, and the possibility of mediums are so diverse, whatever. And I think that's really the great lesson learned from that. And, you know, sort of I had the opportunity to do a presentation about this for you know, about the post digital, and I was saying they've always been digital. So it's like, you know, that's really, I don't see why they would say it's post or whatever. They've always been digital, whatever, right? So I don't really agree with that situation. But the thing that's really important is really they introduced new languages or new ideas about mediums that are important, that could be integral. You know, we were doing it anyways, but I think this really reasserts the importance of introducing analog mediums or others into the architectural process that includes, you know, sort of even heavily computation, whatever. So so I think to me that just broadened the situation. So it doesn't, you know, I don't want to put them down at all. I just think that they really also gave a great contribution.
I like the positive way that you have of looking at that phenomenon.
No, I mean, I'm lucky. No, but it's like, I know a lot of them personally, and I really like them, you know, whatever. And I really see their point, you know, and you know, all those things bring something to the table, right? I mean, it's like you know, there's interesting to have positions, right? You have to have a position, right, about what you really believe in or not. That's an important as an architect. We were saying that earlier, but you know, but the integration of the possible mediums or different things, analog, digital, whatever, is really part of what we do, and I think that's important. Anyways, I'll shut up because I can go on and on. Anyways, but it's Nico's fault. When we were together, we just talk and talk and talk.
Yeah, and haven't happened for a while, so sorry.
No, that's fine.
You were not aware, guys. No, but it was a great conversation, and
yeah, no, thank you. I really want to provoke the conversation. Sorry about that, but I really think that's where you learn things. I mean, you know, that's what I do a lot or whatever. There's these conversations when I want to promote the conversation. So I think that's when the students sometimes learn a lot or whatever. So, or at least they say, well, I'm not going to do what this guy does or whatever. So you know, so I think that's important. But anyways, I'll shut up.
No, but I agree.
Thank you guys so much. I think it was awesome.
This was actually completing the tutorial. Like, it wasn't an add-on, right? That was like part of the tutorial. It was the end of it. So that's the idea. You know, it's not just a tooling session, but you get to the point where you speak for an hour later on about all the implications of what you just saw on the screen. So that's the idea. I think that's also the final message. No, thanks, Gabe.
No, thank you guys. So sorry it just got carried away, but you know, but it was fun. It's fun. Thank you so much. I think it's really, we need more of this or whatever. So
yeah, it's also sometimes in the classes we don't have the time to have this kind of conversation. So I think it was perfect. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here. I hope next time, maybe next year can be in person in Bogota, Cartagena, something like that. I'm inviting because the director was here, but she already left. So, you know, I'll figure it out. But thank you so
You guys
much.
can come to Texas.
Thank
Nick
you
has
so
been in
much.
Texas.
Or to Italy.
Or to, well, you know, don't get me started with Italy, you know, because we're in a side of conversation about Italy.
Okay.
Anyways,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
thank you guys so much.
Thank you, guys.
So Plinio, I know you're a musician. I looked you up, and you're also a musician. So it's like I'm sort of very intrigued.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Yeah, well, yeah, that's my actual master's degree is in music. And that's where I learned computation, actually. I learned it doing software synthesis and programming sound.
Oh, wow.
And in a language called Lisp, which is still around, but is very, very old.
Oh, wow. So that's good that you teach in the Department of Architecture. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I love it. It's new to me. I'm learning probably more than my students are about architecture. I had to learn Rhino in a hurry because I am a Blender head, and I've been working with Blender for 2 decades, and relating to that love-hate relationship with software, Blender heads are only love for Blender. No hate.
Blender's hard, and Blender's hard, I have to say.
It's
I don't know
hard.
that well,
yeah.
so but it's hard, I think.
It's very
but
hard.
It's back. The new version, you know, everyone loves it.
It's been getting better and better. They've been trying to concentrate a lot on the usability aspect because there was a lot of work done in the first decade or so of the software that was oriented towards. Well, they kind of came up with their own paradigm, interface paradigm, and you know, like one of the biggest entry barriers was that you'd select with the right click on the mouse. And that just really threw everyone off of the software because it's the only program in the world that does that.
It does that, yeah. That's funny. So anyway, sorry. I think Daniela's like, okay, shut up. We're leaving. Anyways, very nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Anyways, congratulations. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy. Okay, see you next time, everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you. So good to see you. Good to meet you. Thanks so much. Bye, Nico.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.